Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo. I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter and analyst for Buha's Block. And welcome to another live show. We have some big news that happened this morning, right before I went on Lakers Collective. The Lakers re-signed Austin Reaves to a 4-year, $185 million deal with a player option in the 4th year. They give Austin Reaves a 4-year max, more than his suitors on the open market could have given him. That is a $46 million AAV over 4 years with the player option. So a monster contract for Austin that I think comes in a little bit higher than many expected. It was higher than I expected. I had been projecting a 5-year, $200 million deal where he gets the security with the 5th year, but it's maybe a little bit lower. But I've been talking about the last few months on here on Lakers Collective. Anytime I do a show that I think there's going to be some sticker shock with Austin's number, that people are floating 30 million, 35. I thought it was going to be at least in the $40 million range, if not more. It ends up coming in definitely a bit more than that. We'll be starting out at $41 million in year 1 and then jump up to about 45 in year 2, 48 in year 3, and then nearly 52 million in year 4 when he has that player option. So the deal itself is, I think, a huge win for Austin. If you just look at the origin story with Austin and being an undrafted player and where he started out, originally being a 2-way prospect for the Lakers and then earning his way onto the 15-man roster and then emerging as, I thought he was the 3rd best player on that team as a rookie, and has just continued to chug along and has now ascended to a spot where the Lakers are paying him like a number 2 on a championship team. And I think this is definitely a player-friendly contract, which again is a big win for Austin, where he gets the max and he gets the player option. So he's in control of, over the next 3 years, he gets the 41, 45, 48. If he outperforms that, he can then test free agency and either renegotiate with the Lakers and extend or resign, or he can go sign somewhere else. So he's got a ton of power and flexibility on, coming out of this deal. From the Lakers side, it is a shorter term deal in terms of being a 4-year deal with really a 3+1 versus a 5-year deal. So the Lakers do have some flexibility here in terms of, this is not a 5-year deal where all 5 years are guaranteed. And if for whatever reason Austin does not perform up to the level of the deal, you have this albatross contract on your books that you just can't really get off of. So the Lakers do have some flexibility here of, obviously it could backfire where he outperforms the deal and opts out after 3 years. But I think realistically, he'll probably be on this deal for all 4 years. But again, maybe he opts out, the Lakers extend or figure out a number that works for both sides. But the Lakers lock up a really good player here who had grown. I think this past year was playing at an all-star and all-NBA level before that calf injury in December. Wasn't quite the same player after returning, but overall put up 23, 5 and 5 on elite shooting splits, and comes back early, comes back ahead of his projected timetable, has a little shaky start there, like has some flashes in the Houston series, but wasn't quite the same player, has a really rough game 1 performance, and then it bounces back with a monster game 2. And through the rest of that OKC series, averaged 25 points, 7 assists, 51% shooting, 39% on threes. So I understand that. I saw it on Lakers Collective. I've seen it on social media. There has been a segment of the fan base that is upset with this contract, that thinks it's a little too high or even a lot too high. I know some people thought Austin should be in that 30, 35 million AAV. But I think an element here that, in my understanding of how this all played out, there was real competition for Austin Reaves. The Brooklyn Nets were looming as a team ready to make him that 4-year, $176 million deal, or 178, excuse me, before the Julius Randle situation. And after the Julius Randle situation and after the Honest trade, I came on here and said, this is one of two things. And I think it's the first thing, but it could technically be the second thing. I didn't have clarity at that time, but I was like, I think what this signals is that the Lakers and Austin have agreed to a number. They've put that out to the market, and he is re-signing in LA. And clearly, between the Nets and their potential offer, but also Detroit, we have now since found out, they were trying to move some money around to make a max offer for Austin as well. The Lakers ended up signing a similar deal at a slightly higher number. So he does not get the 5th year, but he does get the player option, and he does get overall more money and a higher AAV than Brooklyn or Detroit could have offered. So I think some people, again, the second option was like he played himself, he misread the market, and that was just not the case, right? So with Brooklyn and Detroit coming in, they applied pressure on the Lakers, and the Lakers had to give Austin the full max. If maybe there's no max market for him, you can negotiate that down a little bit. I don't know how much they actually would have negotiated it down, maybe just a bit, but clearly they were comfortable paying him the max. And so, yeah, so they lock up a really good player on a long-term deal. They keep Luka happy. I think this is an underrated part of this entire situation that some people are overlooking here, where Luka wanted Austin. Luka likes Austin. It's not just the bromance that we see on the bench or that we see on social media. It is an actual basketball fit where you look at the last couple of years, the Lakers have been somewhere between +9 to +11 net rating with Luka and Austin on the floor in the regular season. Now, that did not translate in that first round series against Minnesota, and we did not get to see it again in this postseason because Austin missed part of the Houston series and Luka missed the entire Houston and OKC series. So we have some open-ended questions with how those two fit at the highest levels in the postseason. But from a regular season perspective, we've seen back-to-back 51 seasons with Luka being, I was obviously there second half of that first season, but then there the entire second season. Austin being a top 3 guy on both teams, and at times the number 2 guy on last year's team. And Luka loves Austin and loves the fit, and Luka likes having the backcourt mate. And I know for some it's sacrilegious to bring up the names of Kyrie Irving or Jalen Brunson, even though when I do that, at least, I'm not going to speak for other people. When I do it, it's more the archetype. It's not the player specific. Obviously, Pete Kyrie is at a higher level than Austin, and Jalen Brunson has elevated to finals MVP level. So I'm not comparing Austin to those guys in terms of who's better or if Austin can get to their level, but that player archetype, there's a proof of concept of having a backcourt player who can score and play make at a certain level next to Luka Doncic as that secondary ball handler who can step up and be the primary ball handler when Luka's off. And I think Austin clearly checks that box. Now, does he check it to the degree of a Kyrie or Jalen Brunson? It's TBD. We got to see we have to see the life of this contract and just how the Lakers perform in the playoffs. There will be a ton of pressure on next postseason, but the Lakers keep Luka happy at a time when they are trying to make Luka happy. They're trying to find the A-list center. They are trying to upgrade this roster and put them in position to compete with OKC and San Antonio. And this is where I come to the big thing with all this, right? Because I cannot stress this enough that there's been a lack of understanding, a continued lack of understanding of how Austin's contract actually affects the Lakers' books. So for this season, which if we just take the win now approach, the short-term approach to looking at this season, Austin making $41 million, if the Lakers are operating under the cap, has absolutely zero influence or impact on LA. They are going to keep him on the cap hold of $20.9 million. They're going to operate with their $48 to $52 million in cap space, and they are going to make their moves and then re-sign Austin. If they go above the cap, it does matter to a degree, and it could be the difference in potentially using the full non-taxpayer MLE or maybe using bird rights on a player like a Luke Kennard. But in practicality, they can still re-sign LeBron James, re-sign Rui Hachimura, use the non-taxpayer MLE, and acquire a player via trade, either sending out Jared Vanderbilt, Jake LaRavia, and Dalton Connect, some combination of those three, or they could even fit a sign and trade. I recently did a cap sheet where I had the Lakers acquiring Walker Kessler in a sign and trade, retaining Austin at $40 million, retaining LeBron, retaining Rui, using the non-taxpayer MLE on Marcus, and also keeping Luke Kennard with his bird rights. So it is possible you will be pushing up against the first apron, and the rest of the roster will be minimum guys outside of some of the guys under contract like Adu and Cameron Carr now and Bronny and some of those guys. But that'll be the core, right? It'll basically be running it back with Kessler in place of DeAndre Ayton, and maybe use that non-taxpayer on a different player, although I think keeping Marcus should be a priority for LA. But Austin's money this year is not really going to impact. I mean, it's not going to impact it if they go under the cap. If they go over the cap, if they get close to the first apron, it could be a factor where like Austin at 35 maybe would have given LA more flexibility than 41, but that will be a bridge that we cross if we get there. There's no guarantee the Lakers get that close to the first apron, and it really depends where some of these numbers come in. So that's the big thing I want to highlight. Now, in terms of the long-term impact on the Lakers, I do want to touch on this, because one of the things I've been saying recently was I felt the goal here for all parties, especially the Lakers, should be a number that Austin feels respected and valued and just being taken care of at, which clearly this is, the 4-year max. A number that the Lakers are not impacted financially in terms of their flexibility, which for year one is not the case, that they're not being impacted. In future years, they could be. So that is something here that you have to factor in. And then the third thing was a number that, like, kind of related to point two, was a number low enough or at least with enough value to be tradable. And so I think with the push that Detroit and Brooklyn made for Austin Reaves, they valued him as a max level player, which at 44 AAV, it was going to be similar. The numbers would have been a little bit lower annually, which would have ultimately netted out at that like $2 million less for the lifetime of the deal. But clearly there was at least a couple teams that were valuing Austin as a guy in the low to mid to even high 40s overall, because 44 AAV is the lifetime of the deal, but there would have been 2 years in that contract with Brooklyn or Detroit where he would have been making more than that. So I say all this to say that I think based on the market, based on the way that this played out, Austin will still be a tradable contract, like barring some unforeseen, obviously knock on wood, like injury, or him regressing somehow and him just be turning into a player. Like he's been on the ascent for 5 straight years. He's played better year after year after year. If he somehow regresses, this is an entirely different conversation, but assuming he at least is at the same level he was at this season in the regular season, or next season in the regular season, or continues to ascend, then I think there's going to be a market for Austin in the future if the Lakers choose to pull the plug on this. Because obviously any contract you sign, you want to make the player feel valued. You want it to be a number that's not really impacting your optionality to improve the roster. And for now, I think this checks both those boxes. The third one that we just don't have clarity on is like, where's the trade value going to be with this in a year, in a couple years? Obviously, that's even assuming the Lakers are entertaining potentially trading Austin. But like, you don't want to be signing a contract where you feel hamstrung, where you're stuck with it. That is TBD. We don't have a crystal ball to see where Austin will be at a year from now, 2 years from now. But at least based on the market, I think he would need a pretty significant fall from grace to not have some value, at least by next summer, where it feels like if the Lakers do move on, this is not going to be some like 2 or 3 year thing where it would be like, all right, this year you gave him the money, he isn't quite at that level, and then you flame out in the playoffs. There's just maybe a limitation there with Austin and Luka. Then you move on from it next summer. I think at that point he would still have a certain amount of value, but so that's the only thing that like we just don't know where how the contract is going to age and where it's at. But clearly there was at least 2 other teams that were interested in giving Austin a max contract and paying him basically the same amount of money, marginally less. So that signals to me that I think there will still be a market for Austin as soon as next summer if the Lakers choose to pull the plug on this core, which I don't foresee happening. I think they are going to ride this out, and it is going to be finding that next long-term third piece around Luka and Austin. Certainly, though, from the Lakers side, this is a bet on Austin as a top 2 level player on a championship team. If you look at the New York build, technically, you can get away with having multiple guys making 30 plus million, multiple guys making 35 plus million. So you could potentially structure this where Austin eventually is the number 3, and you bring in a number 2 who's paid at a similar level or even a little bit less, and it's like a value situation. But clearly, paying Austin a 4-year max, 25% max, is a sign that like guys that get that are viewed as foundational building block pieces that are top 2 or at a minimum top 3 on like a loaded trio type guys on a team. So that's the bet that the Lakers are making here, and we'll see how that bet plays out. But like clearly, based on the market and their own confidence in Austin. I've talked about this ad nauseum. They have refused to trade Austin for Kyrie Irving, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, De'Aaron Fox, guys like this. That they have had situations where they could have traded Austin, Zach LaVine. They could have traded Austin for all-star level guards in their primes that they just deemed Austin was too good to trade and too good to put in those deals. So I think this is a huge bet on Austin and his potential and his production up to this point, his continued ascension year after year. And he certainly, in my opinion, will have to continue to ascend and get better to warrant this contract. I think Austin in the low to even mid 40s, you could potentially justify based on his production this past year, even if he just maintains that. But as you get into the hollowed air of closer to 50 million and even above 50 million, that is a certain class of player that I think Austin was playing close to that level in the first couple months of the season, but then post calf injury never was quite back to that. And also LeBron returned. There was some jostling in terms of trying to figure out the offensive hierarchy and all that stuff. But it will be interesting now to see moving forward, like, does he perform to that level? Because Austin in the high 30s, low 40s, even up to mid 40s, I think he has performed at that level, at least in a regular season context, especially this past season. Austin in the high 40s, Austin in the low 50s, that's a different class of player that we are talking about max guys. And to be that level of max, I think he's got to level up even more than his current level. In terms of impact on Austin, obviously the expectations are like the aw shucks, undrafted, small town kid from Arkansas. Like, that stuff is his origin story. And that's been a big part of just what's been fun about this ride with Austin in terms of his ascent and where he's gone to and playing for Team USA and the I'm him moment and just what he has grown into. But now there's a different level of expectations. Austin is now being paid as a max level player. He will be evaluated on the scale and through the lens of a max level player. So with great power comes great responsibility. With a max contract comes great scrutiny. And so with Austin now, like, some of the excuses or justifications of certain things of whatever, but whatever it's been throughout the last couple of years, those things are like, now it's max level. It's max or bust. And so I think that's like, he's going to have a certain magnifying glass and certain level of scrutiny that he will be dealing with in terms of a max level player. I think in his shoes is a guy who's averaging 21 to 24 points a night consistently and 5 to 7 assists consistently and really good shooting splits. And he's been there this past year, 23, 5 and 5, good shooting splits. Obviously in the playoffs, his numbers were lower, although he started to, I think, find his footing in that OKC series, the final 3 games. But certainly we have judged him through a certain lens of like the third option and making $15 million and like kind of evaluating, is he a number 2? Is he a number 3? He's getting paid now like a number 2. He's getting paid at a max level. And that is the expectations now with his production, with his performance. And if he does not deliver on that, obviously then we have that conversation and the Lakers have to figure out where they go from there at that point. In terms of the offseason, one of the interesting things with this, and for those who watch the show religiously, thank you. But if you remember a couple shows ago, someone asked me, what did I think was the most likely move to come first for the Lakers? Like, what's going to be the first signing for the Lakers? And I said that I thought Austin and his next contract was going to be the first thing because Austin was priority number 1 for LA among their current free agents. And they wanted to lock him up and they wanted to give Luka a running mate for the long run. And that was a big priority for Luka, big priority for the Lakers. They had the as we learned from Shams, the AR initialed pillows that they presented for him, and they had the country music playing, and like they wooed him. There was a wooing in this process here. But the one thing with Austin signing and the kind of tricky thing with all this was that it didn't inherently show whether the Lakers are going to operate above the cap or under the cap. So we still don't have clarity yet. I think, as I've been saying for a couple of weeks, that it's been trending toward them operating above the cap and then trying to make some sort of move of either it's fitting in an RFA with a sign and trade or a free agent with a sign and trade, or potentially adding someone with the non-taxpayer MLE with that tool, and then running it back to some degree with LeBron and Rui and Marcus and potentially Luke. So I think that's the way that this has been trending, where the Lakers might be making one mid-size to big move and like maybe a smaller move, or like a couple mid-size moves. I don't see a great overhaul for the roster as things currently stand. And I will note, I noted this on Lakers Collective, just in the general offseason discourse, there has been some buzz that there could be an agreement coming soon with LeBron, or there could be an agreement coming soon with Rui, a potential extension. So if the Lakers do sign LeBron at a certain number and also extend Rui, I think that would indicate that they are going above the cap. Technically, you can do both those things and have cap space depending on where the numbers come in. But realistically, if you are not rescinding the rights to LeBron and Rui and you are quickly agreeing to deals with them, that would indicate you're probably not using the cap space and you're going above the cap. So we'll see if that plays out. Again, I'm not like officially reporting that. I'm just saying there's been some of that buzz out there. So we'll see if that's how it ends up playing out. But I mean, I think it has been kind of telegraphed that like the last week or two, it has been trending more toward LA, running it back to a degree with the core, and then trying to find upgrades at the center spot and the wing spot. And we'll see if they are able to execute that. But yeah, in terms of final thoughts on the Austin contract, I think it's a huge win for Austin. I think it's a player-friendly contract where he gets the max money, he gets the player option in year 4, and he also gets the ultimate confidence from the Lakers that they view him as a max-level player. They are confident in what he has done, particularly his 5th year, but him continuing to ascend. From the Lakers side, you lock up a really good player on the 25% max and not the 30 or 35% max. You keep Luka happy. You have now your foundation moving forward with Luka and Austin, and you are taking a gamble here and a bet on Austin, I think, ascending to an even higher level, or at least playing like those first couple months of the season every night and as consistently as possible. And then we'll see moving forward, just like how this contract ages. Like, of course, from the Lakers side, you obviously always want the contract to be as low as possible. So there is some inherent risk here with LA going with the max for a 4-year deal. But based on the market, based on how things were playing out, the disaster scenario would have been losing Austin for nothing. And with Ayo DeSumo going off the board, staying in Minnesota, them partly doing that Randall trade to keep DeSumo, there was no alternative here. And so Utah, there's a possibility of a sign and trade, right? With you could do like a sign and trade, Austin to Utah for Kessler, or Austin to Detroit for Duren. My understanding, especially after they drafted Darren Peterson, even before they drafted Darren Peterson, but like just didn't really make sense with Utah. That was not something that they were going to do. But I think drafting Peterson, having George and Peterson, like doesn't make sense to bring in Austin. And then with Detroit, I think their goal was to keep Duren and add Austin to that, not lose Duren for Austin. So if you're looking at like potential sign and trades there, it didn't really make sense for Utah. Didn't really make sense for Detroit. And I bring up those two teams in particular just because Detroit had interest in Austin. Utah has had previous interest in Austin, and both those teams have centers that the Lakers could desperately use. But I did not see natural sign and trade partners there. You look at Brooklyn, they have nothing to really offer the Lakers. Like if the Lakers ended up flipping Austin for picks, I know that there's a segment of the fan base that would have loved that. It'd been like, look, we got picks, and like Austin's overrated and this and that. But that would not have made the Lakers a better team. And if you are already kind of on shaky ground with Luka because you have not really added a long-term piece in the last 3 transaction cycles, and now you're saying, hey, we traded one of your best friends on the team, a guy that you wanted us to keep, and we got some picks, we got some flexibility, but oh yeah, also Ayo DeSumo is off the table now, so we're going to sign Quentin Grimes and Kelly Oubre and Robert Williams III. Like, we hope you like that plan. We hope that is a better team than this past season. Like, that's just not realistic. That's not how this is going to play out. So once Luka started to leverage his power and be like, I want Austin back, I don't want you to trade Austin, that to me signaled that the Lakers were going to keep Austin no matter what. Then it came down to, was there going to be a market for him? Was there going to be people applying external pressure? And clearly there was in Brooklyn prior to the Randall trade, and Detroit up until also the Randall trade. Because I think around then, that was when it was agreed to, and it's been done for a couple of days here. But yeah, I think the huge bet from the Lakers on Austin and his talent and his continued ascension. Huge win for Austin in getting basically winning every level of the negotiation with the exception of maybe the fifth year. And I don't yet have clarity as to whether he preferred a fourth year or fifth year and if he would have wanted a 4+1 instead of 3+1. But maybe the Lakers got like the win on the shorter, the extra year off the contract. But certainly Austin got the max, got the player option, and is now being paid as a max player. So the offseason had already started in general. The offseason had already started for the Lakers with trading up from 25 to 24 to get Cameron Carr. But the offseason is now officially underway. The Lakers have made their first transaction, non-draft related, and re-signed Austin Reaves, 4 years, $185 million. With all that said, let's get into the Q&A here. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. Feels like Turner's coming for Vando and DK saves Bucks $10 million. I would want a draft asset if I'm the Lakers, just because I've talked about this before. I'm a little bit lower, and sorry, I'm just checking. Got to be constantly checking my texts and checking Twitter just to make sure I'm not missing anything during all of this, because you never know when something's going to break. But in terms of Turner, at a minimum, and I've tried to be consistent on my Turner takes here, because I do vacillate with Turner, where like there's times I talk myself a little bit more into him. There's times I think have a more sober perspective on it. But with Turner, I think at a minimum, I want either a first round pick or getting off Vando. Ideally both. I think that would be the most appealing version of a Turner trade for me, would be getting a first, even if it's like lottery protected, or you can't do a top 12 to 15 protection, but I don't know, top 11 protected, top 16 protected, whatever, something like that from Milwaukee, plus getting off of Vando, and you sweeten the pot by throwing in DK or whatever. That would be a framework of a Turner deal I would entertain. If it's just getting off Vando, or it's even just the first, I'm not quite sure. And I know that there's a segment of people who are high on Turner and are like, hey, he's 2 years removed from being the starting center on a championship team, or a team that made the finals, nearly won a championship, went to game 7 with the champs. Tyrese Halliburton is feeling himself, hits 3 threes in that first quarter before he tears his Achilles. And like, there's an alternate reality where Indiana wins, he stays healthy, Pacers win the title, and Turner's a championship level starting center. I follow that up though, from a fit perspective, he's just not the lob threat or rebounder that you need on a Luka team. And I think there's a real limitation. Like, I think you can fit a stretch big next to Luka, but I don't think that can be your primary big, or that big needs to be a lob threat. And in this scenario, Turner would both be the primary big and not the traditional aerial attack lob threat. So I just think there's a real limitation there with, he's not a big who likes to be spamming the pick and roll and rim running. And like, that's just not, it would kind of be DeAndre Ayton-esque in terms of forcing a player into a role that they're not comfortable with, that they don't prefer. And Turner is established enough where I could see there being a little friction there. Like, he just doesn't want to play that role. So I'm sure he wants to get out of Milwaukee, but do you want to play a role that is not really your strength and is just not really how you're accustomed to playing? Like that, that's an open-ended question, to say nothing of, again, the rebounding. But the other part of that for me is just that I also think Turner started to struggle a bit in the conference finals against New York and the finals against OKC. He shot pretty, I think collectively, what was in the low 30s across those two series. So did not shoot well in either one of those series. There was times where he was kind of played off the floor for segments of those series, and they would go smaller with Siakam or Obi Toppin at the 5. And so, and those are two of the 3 best teams in the league that the Lakers are potentially gonna have to go through next season. So I just have some concern with Turner, and there's an element here of like, even if you get, let's just say my best case scenario, you get to put in Vando and you get the first round pick back, you still have Miles Turner as your starting center. And I just don't know if he is good enough or a good enough fit. I think he's good enough to be a starting center. Is he good enough starting center or good enough to be a starting center on a championship team? That I don't know. It almost happened, but I also think Indiana played a different style where like they had other guys, like Siakam was a little bit more of the guy putting pressure on the rim. They weren't as heavy of a pick and roll team in that threat or in that way. And they use the threat of Miles Turner shooting as more of a pick and pop big. So that's where I just think there's a natural fit there with him in Indiana compared to him in LA that I just think it's two totally different situations. And my fear would just be, even if you got the best case scenario with a Turner deal, which in my opinion would be getting off Vando and getting back a first, it's still like, can you win with Turner being a pick and pop big and not a real lob threat? And like, and also being a subpar rebounder. Like, that's the thing. I continue to say I have 3 boxes for Lakers center: rim runner, lob threat, elite rebounder, elite rim protector. You need to check at least 2 of those 3, ideally all 3. Turner checks one of them. Good defender, good rim protector. He's not a rebounder. He's not a lob threat. So that's where I'm personally out on Turner and Isaiah Stewart and Kristaps Porzingis. There's always exceptions. So it depends on the alternatives. It depends on the opportunity cost. But I'm personally lower on Turner than consensus. So if this is how it plays out, I would hope the Lakers could find a way to somehow add like a Robert Williams off the bench and at least have like a different look with the bench big. If it's like Turner and Hayes, I just don't think you're good enough, and you don't have that like high level. Like Robert Williams to me is at a different level than Jackson. I think he's a much better player than Jackson on both sides, and I think I would be more okay with that in like a bench role in conjunction with Turner. But I don't think Turner is just like the answer here. I don't think Turner is the solve to LA's struggles. I think they need a more athletic, forceful, physical rim pressuring big. Then BT Kingsley follows up. Thank you for the super chat. If we give Braun 35 to 40 and lose Rui, how much cap left? So LeBron's, if the Lakers are going under the cap, LeBron's money would directly come out of the pot in terms of like the cap that the Lakers have. So if they're at 48 million, they could get to about 60 million if they renounce the rights to Jackson Hayes and DeAndre Ayton opts out. So that could get you to closer to 60 million. I've often thrown out 56 million because I think they're going to keep Jackson Hayes on his cap hold, especially because Luka wants him back. But if you say renounce the rights to Jackson, run the risk of someone else signing him, and you just see if you could use an exception or part of an exception or something with him, then if you want to go like max cap space and go up to 60, DA opts out, you risk losing Jackson. LeBron making 35 to 40, you have somewhere between 20 to 25 million left over. If it's the more likely scenario, which is LA having somewhere between 48 to 52 million in cap space, that's obviously somewhere between 13 to 17 million if LeBron is at 35, or it's at 8 to 12 million if LeBron is at 40. So realistically, in either scenario, 13 to 17 or 8 to 12, that's not enough to add an impact player. You're not adding Watson. You're not adding Kessler. You're not adding, you might not even be in the Mitchell Robinson race, that he might be priced out at that point, or at least like full non-taxpayer MLE for him. So you're in a tough spot where it probably just makes more sense to keep Rui at that point and then figure out a different way to go get a center. So I think, I've said this before with the LeBron cap space situation, but if the Lakers are going the cap space route, which it seems like they're not, but if they do, LeBron, that's where LeBron's probably got to be closer to 20, 25. Because if LeBron's at 20 and you have 60, now you still have 40 left. Or even if you're at 52, you still have 32 left. That's a big chunk of money to do something with. If LeBron's at 35, 40, you probably lose Rui anyway, because even 13 to 17 might not be enough for Rui. But then you also don't really have enough to add like another impact player. So that's where it just, paying LeBron that much, it does get tricky. So I continue to say I think we'll see something like 1 year 25 or 2 year 50, and that would be 25 over each year, like a 1+1, something like that. So I think LeBron will be closer to that 20-25 range. Miss Optimist, thank you for the super chat. Hi, Jovan. How likely is it that LBJ stays with LA and on what kind of contract? Also, how likely is it for him to go to Cleveland, Miami, or Golden State? Thanks. It's a good question. I would still say the most likely scenario right now is LeBron staying in LA. If I had to do a pie chart breakdown, I would probably go 55% staying in LA, 40% going elsewhere, 5% retiring. I think that would be my current breakdown of the most likely outcomes here. So very low probability of retiring, but it is not officially off the table yet. So we have to leave that door open to a minimal degree. And then I would put the odds then like 55 versus 40 in terms of him staying in LA. So, I guess if you're extrapolating that out, it's maybe, 50, 57, 43 or 58, 42, something like that, if you're looking at those two specific options. So I still think it's more likely than not that he ends up staying in LA. In terms of what type of contract, I think it's going to be closer to, if I had to put an exact figure on it, I would bet 25 million AAV. That would be my current expectation. There is a chance that if LA does go over the cap, that could maybe increase closer to 30 million. But if you go over the cap, to still improve the roster, like every dollar will matter. That's where Austin's contract will matter. That's where LeBron's contract will matter. If you're going under, it only matters in terms of like how much cap space you have remaining. But if you go over, the fear then becomes you're going to push up against the first apron, and that'll just be a factor. So I would still put it somewhere in the mid 20s, but I'll say for putting an exact number on it, 25 million AAV. Maybe he gets the 1+1 and it, I don't know, it's like 25 and like 27 or 25 and 28, something like that. In terms of how likely it is for him to go to Cleveland, Miami, or Golden State, if I was ranking these three options, I would rank them Golden State, Cleveland, Miami. So Golden State is interested in LeBron at the non-taxpayer MLE. They have that weapon at their disposal. So I think that will at least set a certain market for LeBron in terms of he's got a $15 million offer waiting for him. So that's why I don't think he's going to re-sign with the Lakers at anything lower than that. And it will almost certainly be higher than that if he does stay in LA. So I think Golden State's going to be one of the teams that's interested, that sets the market at a minimum at the non-taxpayer MLE. And then Cleveland is just difficult to make the math work. There are scenarios with the sign and trade, although then they're hard capped at the first apron where they're already juggling at the second apron. So that's a little tricky and complicated. He could obviously sign there depending on which exception they're able to clear. If it's the room exception, I mean, they're not gonna have the room exception, but it could be the taxpayer MLE or the non-taxpayer, depends where they're at in terms of their finances and if they could shed some money or not. You could do some sort of Jared Allen, LeBron James sign and trade. I don't really get that from Cleveland's perspective, from the lens of centers are just so valuable that, I mean, unless you think Evan Mobley is ready to be a full-time 5, like I would just hope I could find, add LeBron a different way than losing Jared Allen. If I'm Cleveland, for the Lakers, I understand like part of the appeal of you're getting your center for the long run now, and you're starting the Luka era now entirely around Luka, Austin, Jared Allen. But it's also a question of like, is that good enough? Is that a good enough trio because you're heavily investing in Jared Allen at that point based on his contract. So that's an open-ended question, but also the Lakers have limited options. So if they can get a center, they have to find a way to get a center. So I would do Golden State, Cleveland, Miami. Miami's in a spot where they technically have the non-taxpayer MLE, so they could offer that to LeBron, but they're trying to keep Norman Powell, although it's looking like he's probably going to leave. And maybe Miami over Cleveland, actually. I think that's probably close, but I feel like there's been enough Cleveland buzz throughout the past year that there's got to be a little smoke there in terms of some level of mutual interest. So I would go Golden State, Cleveland, Miami. I think the big thing with Golden State is, especially for those who have made the flight from LA to San Francisco, very quick flight, 45 minutes to an hour. And it could be a situation where LeBron, I don't foresee his family relocating necessarily, maybe occasionally relocating, but like realistically, they're going to be in LA. So it could be a situation where he gets like an apartment, a hotel suite, whatever. And that's his like San Francisco residence, but he's commuting from LA. And then when they have a homestand, flies up the family and they're all together there when he's in California. But he's already traveling so much throughout the regular season that I guess that's the argument for him not necessarily being in LA, if you wanted to make that argument. But I would rank it still more likely than not. He's back in LA, likely on a $25 million deal. And I would rank these Golden State, Cleveland, Miami as constructed. Ms. Optimist follows up, also bring Claire DeLune to the Lakers collective. I like that suggestion. We are currently trying to figure out who the third person is going to be. We had also discussed potentially going with the two of us, Trevor and I, but we are making our deliberations right now in terms of who would fit as a third person. So love Claire, have loved when she's been on the show. I know you guys have loved it as well, and that is a great suggestion. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. How do you feel about Jackson, DA, Turner, big man trio? So I guess to the point, I'll say this. It could be worse. It's not my favorite, but I was making the point a little bit earlier when you were asking about Turner. Could you get Robert Williams and have at least someone, I guess a thing with getting Turner would be I would want a third big who's better than Jackson. I would want Jackson then to be slotted more as the third big rather than the second big or second center. And so DA does check that box. He is better than Jackson. He's not always better than Jackson. It depends on the night. It's a bit of a crapshoot, but in the aggregate, DA is a better player than Jackson. And so I guess that would be like the bare minimum for me would be a Turner, DA, Jackson. But again, I don't think DA can play against OKC. I guess it's TBD against San Antonio, although I thought he progressively played worse against San Antonio in the regular season. Jackson, I don't think could play against San Antonio and had one good game against OKC, but was otherwise pretty bad and unplayable. So I'm like, it's really all on Turner at that point, where Robert Williams, I have more confidence in. He actually played Wemby pretty well in that first round series, like all things considered. And I do think Williams just he plays with more force than Jackson or DA and is a better rim protector, better defender, better rebounder, and also I would say like on similar level to Jackson as like a lob threat. Jackson probably gets a little bit higher. He's also taller, but Robert Williams is a really efficient rim scorer and also has got hook shots and stuff. So I would say this would be more like my plan D or maybe even plan E. I still think the Lakers need that high level rim runner. I think you only really have that here in Jackson, and Jackson to me is more of like a solid backup, but not even. He still has some situations where I don't trust Jackson, like against Houston. I would not trust him against Denver. I probably would not trust him against San Antonio. So it's like you're really putting a lot of eggs on the DA Turner basket, and I don't trust that basket either. So I talked myself into it at first. I'm kind of talking myself out of it, but I really think they need to add what if they go the 3-center committee or they invest in a starting center. One of those two, either of those paths needs a high level lob threat rim runner. I just think that's an essential, invaluable skill next to Luka Doncic. BT Kingsley follows up. I feel like Keon Ellis can be got for the low. I agree. He's had a bit of a fall from grace this past season, especially post trade deadline being in Cleveland. There was times he was a DNP CD during the playoffs for Cleveland. So Keon Ellis is someone I would take a gamble on. Ideally at a minimum level or maybe a little bit above the minimum. I think I saw there might have been a report that someone was saying he might be getting like double-digit millions. I think that's a little bit too high for my liking with Keon. He's one of these guys, and I've been guilty of this because I have been a Keon fan, but he kind of exists more in theory than he does in reality, and he has these flashes, but he's just not quite been able to put it together yet. And I think part of that was opportunity in Sacramento, but he did also get some opportunity in Cleveland, just like wasn't that guy. So I still think there's something there, but it might be more of a situation where he's more like a 9th or 10th man type level. And for that, I would invest the minimum. I would maybe go up a little bit more to like the $4 to $5 million range, but I don't know that I would go anything above that. And if his market's above that, then I would just pass on him. DS43115. Thank you for the super chat. When I asked you what you thought would be the first move, you absolutely nailed it. Well done. Thanks for all the work you do. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the acknowledgement on that. And I didn't quite nail the Austin contract. I thought it was going to be 5 years, 200, where a little less AAV, but he gets the 5th year, but he gets 4-year max and 3+1. So his agents nailed that negotiation. That was a job well done. Yu-Gi-Oh! Dual channel, thank you for the super chat. Isn't a true A-list center worth losing Braun over? I just do not understand how the Lakers do both, pay an A-list center and keep Braun and everyone else. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I would say it really depends on who the A-list center is. Like Jared Allen is an interesting Rorschach test. That word always gives me problems. Where like he's kind of you see like he's at a certain level. He's been an all-star before. He is a good center, and there's a reason why he's making that level of money. But he's also had he's had the playoff lights be a little too bright, as he said, coming out of that New York series, and has had some times where he's been pushed around a little bit, struggled physically in the playoffs. So like Jared Allen is an interesting barometer of just like how you feel about him and if you feel like that would be worth losing LeBron over. But yeah, I mean, this is the central tension of the Lakers offseason to a degree, is like it is difficult to lose LeBron and stay at the same level because of how great LeBron is. And I think he just performed at a top 25 level and was the best player in a playoff series that the Lakers won. At the same time, the Lakers need to be building for the next era of basketball. And if they are still, it feels like if you keep LeBron, and again, this is the central tension, like if you keep LeBron, you have 1 foot in the now and 1 foot still in like the future. Whereas if you do get this A-list center and it does potentially cost you LeBron, you're now jumping into the pond of like the future, and you're saying, and you're making the future the now, and you're saying like, all right, we're officially in the Luka era. Everything is built and optimized around Luka, or like we're in the process of doing that. And that's what it's about. Whereas because as great as LeBron is, like, or because of how great LeBron is, LeBron's obviously going to be a big part of the Lakers' identity, right? Like he's going to be a starter. He's going to play a certain amount of minutes. He's going to have a certain impact. He's going to have a certain usage. He's going to put up certain numbers. And that's all great. The downside is at some point next summer or the following summer, maybe if he signs a 2-year deal, you are going to be in a situation where you lose LeBron off your cap sheet. You now need to replace that. And you also lose LeBron out of your starting group, out of your closing group, and as a big part of your identity. So it's like there's an argument of you could try to maximize the short term and just be like, keep LeBron and see if you can win a title or have a conference final showing, whatever, with this group. Or is it better to take a step back and say, hey, we know we're going to be worse losing LeBron, but maybe we get the center, and then next summer we could add another piece, or next trade deadline or whatever, we kind of build the roster brick by brick to get to the ultimate contention level and win a championship. That's something that the Lakers are deliberating over. And I still think the most likely outcome is keeping LeBron, and their preference would be to keep LeBron. But if it shakes out where LeBron doesn't like their pitch, doesn't like their contract that they're offering, or a different suitor woos him, then I think the silver lining there for the Lakers would certainly be finding maybe, getting that long-term piece, whether it's a center or a wing or whatever, and then kind of moving on to the next era. And even if you're not as good in the short term for the next year, you are now building continuity. You're building a core that's going to be there for years. Because that's just the thing. LeBron, there's a finish line here. It's a year from now or 2 years from now. LeBron will no longer be a Laker. He'll no longer be in the NBA. And so as long as you are keeping LeBron on the roster, it is a short-term play to some degree, because if this was 5 years ago, it's a totally, obviously LeBron's a max player. It's a different conversation. The Lakers would be the best team in the league. But if it's 5 years ago, it's different because you have a longer runway. But like the finish line is in sight, whether it's a year or 2 years. So that's the tension with the Lakers offseason right now, is like, and so I think it depends on who the center is in terms of just outright losing LeBron and like turning the page. I think there are some guys they would consider it. I think there are some guys they wouldn't. I believe Brian Windhorst reported today that Jared Allen is a guy that they would consider doing that for. So make of that what you will. Maybe there is some sort of Cleveland, LA sign and trade that they could figure out. But it really depends like who the A-list center is. Like if it's Wemby, like obviously, yeah, right. Like there are some guys where you would do that in a heartbeat. I think Kessler and Duren are pretty, like, if it comes down to it, would you rather have Kessler for the next 5 years or Duren for the next 5 years, or LeBron for 1 to 2 years? Like, I think LeBron's clearly better than both of those guys right now, and potentially puts LA, at least from like a top end talent perspective, in a different tier. But you also are getting 5 years out of Kessler or 5 years out of Duren. I guess technically 4, but if it's a sign and trade, you can maybe get the 5th year. that's a conversation, right? So there's a lot of nuance within this, and there's a lot of, I think, opportunity cost alternatives. Those are at the core of this as well, as just like, if you keep LeBron, you kind of got to map it out of like, all right, if you keep LeBron at number X, here are our options. If you can get LeBron down to number Y, here are our options. If you pay LeBron more, here are options. Then if you lose LeBron or you trade him or whatever, here are the scenarios. So this is something that the Lakers are currently working through. I still think it's going to end up in LeBron staying and playing one more year and retiring a Laker, but maybe it doesn't. Like I think there's a lot up in the air still. NATO, thank you for the super chat. Should get Musa Cisse as a third stringer center. That's an interesting name that I'm going to pull up his numbers here. For my so this past year in Dallas, we'll look at his per 36 that just kind of extrapolated out, like 12 points, 15 rebounds, 3 blocks. In terms of his finishing, shot 65% at the rim, which is actually a little low for a big overall. Shot 68% on twos. I'm kind of surprised by that rim finishing. Primarily a guy playing within 10 feet or so. Overall shot 57% from the floor. Yeah, he's interesting. Definitely like a minimum level guy. I think the issue for me is, especially with the way that the center position is trending for LA, I almost view the optimal build. If you can't get the big name, the A-list guy, I think to me it's a 3-headed situation, but where Jackson Hayes is actually the third best guy. I think Jackson, if you're going center by committee, I feel much more confident in your center situation if Jackson's the number 3 versus Jackson being the number 2. And in this case, Cisse would be the number 3 and Jackson would be the number 2. So I think it might, if the Lakers get their primary center and Jackson's the number 2, you could talk me into Cisse being a candidate for the number 3 spot. If it is the center by committee, I don't think he's good enough to be in the center by committee as of right now. Obviously, he's got some upside. He's 23, going to be 24 in September. So he is a little bit older than you might think for a guy who's only played 1 year, but did show some flashes in Dallas. I like him. I see what you're getting at with him, but I don't know if he's ready to be in a 3-headed center committee unless you have like the stud no-brainer starter. If you do, and then Jackson and then him from a asset relocation or allocation, standpoint, that makes some sense. If it's like Robert Williams, Jackson, and Cisse, I just don't. I think that's a little too raw. Justin Block, thank you for the super chat. Sadiq plus Eve for Vando Connect and first equals optionality. It's an interesting trade because I view the first, like in a vacuum, if we're putting contracts to the side, which is obviously a huge disclaimer here, like a huge external factor that I'm removing from the equation. I think a fair trade, money be damned, would be something like Vando plus Dalton plus like 2 seconds for Sadiq and Misi. The first is partly to get those guys in lieu of having a couple seconds, and it's also to get off Vando. So I understand where you're coming from. My preference personally would be, if you are trading the first, I really want a starter back. So like on the low end, that's like some version of a Turner trade where I know, for as flawed as Turner might be, as much of an awkward fit as it might be with Luka, Turner is a starting level center. And if you're giving, and you wouldn't be giving up the first in that deal, but you maybe, depending on what else is in it, you might have to attach a first for Vando, and then you get something back, Turner plus something else, whatever. Maybe not the best example here, but point being is, like, if I'm giving up the first, I want on the low end, like that type of deal, or obviously on a higher end, getting back one of the sign-in, RFAs and like a sign-in trade or something. So I feel like if I'm giving up the first, I want a starting center or starting wingback. I don't know if Yves Missi is a starting level center. He's shown some flashes of that. I think he's got the upside and the potential to grow into that. I think he'd be a nice fit next to Luka. I just wonder if he's more of a high level backup than an actual starter. So maybe if it really comes down to opportunity cost and what your other pathways are. Like there are scenarios where this could make sense to me, but like I know you're giving up the first ultimately because of Vando and you have to attach it to get off Vando's contract. I guess I just wonder if for me, my preference would be to be getting back a starter if I'm giving up a first. That said, to your point about optionality, if you do go through with this trade, you add in a solid rotation level bench forward in Sadiq Bey. You add in Missi, who could maybe be a placeholder starter for now or more like a high level bench player. You still have some optionality to go sign. Like maybe it ends up being Robert Williams, Yves Missi, and Jackson Hayes. And that's not my favorite center grouping, but you do have some insurance. If Williams gets injured, you have Missi and Jackson. You have three guys who are all lob threats, and you have a certain amount of athleticism, and especially with Missi and Jackson and Robert Williams, like a certain amount of just raw athleticism and rim pressure and force around the paint. You're on the lighter side collectively, but beggars can't be choosers. Like the Lakers they can't plug every hole at the five. So like there's going to be some holes there in terms of the shooting, in terms of the overall skill with those three. But yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you follow this up with, but you do. So I think you save off the top of my head, you might be saving what, like 4 million here or so, 4 to 6 million, if I'm not mistaken. Could be somewhere in that range of 4 to 6 million. So you do get a little bit more cap space, and you get off the Vando contract, and then you still have room to do other things. So yeah, I guess I'm a little bit more open to it. My preference would be, if you're giving up the first, to be getting a starting level player. Again, Turner's the wrong example because you don't give up the first for Turner. You need to get the first for Turner, but like, or first for Gafford, or a first for Jared Allen, or a first for someone of that ilk, a first and something for Derek Lively, or two firsts for Derek Lively, whatever. But like, I want something like that if I'm giving up the first. If I'm having to attach the first for Vando, which is the price of getting off Vando's contract. But I do like Sadiq and Missi, and you still have the optionality to go get a high-level center or wing and keep LeBron or keep Rui, and you have some optionality there, as you highlight. So you're talking me into it. I see the vision. Jay Spares, thank you for the super chat. AR's contract isn't the issue. Too much to do in too little time. Rob is criminally underprepared and will lose his job in a year, but Luka and the fan base suffers because Genie wanted to protect him. Dumb. So, like, you're more so saying here, it's like you're more so attacking the overall offseason plan and where the Lakers are at. And I understand that. Like, I made the point earlier today on Lakers Collective. I made the point on here that I am a little, well, not even a little, I'm pretty concerned with how the center market's currently playing out. You've had situations where the RFAs aren't necessarily projecting to be available right now. You have Nick Claxton off the board. You have Ware off the board. You have Turner and Stewart still out there, not the best fits, but like even then, Stewart was potentially going to be involved if they expanded it to Hero going to Detroit, but now that isn't happening. So I think Stewart's still available and Turner's still available, but there's maybe a way to either get a lower cost or I think the Lakers would have to give up. They're not, I don't think they're going to dump Stewart. I think it would be a situation where LA has to give something up, and I would not give up a first round pick for Isaiah Stewart. And so they're just in a tough spot with the center position. Like, as I think through who could potentially be available, I look at the Dallas bigs. Is Gafford or Lively available at the right price? And I look at potentially Hartenstein now with OKC's logjam at the 5. If you can twist their arm a bit, apply pressure and be like, here's 30 million for Isaiah Hartenstein. Here's 32 million for Isaiah Hartenstein. Maybe that. Now, technically, the issue here is that OKC is a team option. So if it's like the Lakers can't just be like, hey, here's a bag and he leaves, he obviously would have to be a free agent. So if it comes to the point of OKC's like, we want you to opt out and take less, and Hartenstein's like, well, if I opt out, the Lakers will pay me more. Then if I'm OKC, I just opt him into the team option and then figure it out next summer. And maybe he regresses a little bit, or maybe he's another injured season or something, and it lowers his value to where you get better value maybe next summer. So those are like maybe some of the guys I could see being available. Obviously, Robert Williams, Mitchell Robinson, those are two guys in free agency that will be available. But that's a relatively underwhelming list. Like if we go Dallas Bigs, Hartenstein, Turner, Stewart, Porzingis, maybe if you outbid Golden State, and then Williams and Robinson, that's not the sexiest list. Like I would clearly prefer Lively or Hartenstein as a longer term option. To the next level, I would go Gafford, and then I would say there's a drop off to. I would actually go Robinson and Williams over Turner and Stewart. That's how much I don't like the fit with Turner and Stewart compared to Robinson and Williams. But I would not really prefer Robinson or Williams as a starter. Like I think those guys are high level backups. So they are in a tough spot. They're definitely in a tough spot. If I think a big thing here to monitor going into free agency is what happens with Denver, and is Denver able to shed salary with Christian Brown or Cam Johnson to allow them to keep Peyton Watson. If Denver's not able to shed that, that does put, I think, Peyton Watson in play potentially as a casualty there, and LA can sign him. If they do shed that money, that puts them in the driver's seat. I think he's going to stay in Denver, and the Lakers, maybe they could get involved and get the Cam Johnson or Christian Brown, but they're not getting the Peyton Watson. So, I mean, underprepared, it's difficult. It's difficult to know all the options the Lakers have had, but what we will say from a blanket perspective is just there's a ton of pressure on this offseason. The Lakers have to nail this offseason. The early returns have been mixed, I would say, to start the offseason overall. I like LA locking up Austin to a long-term deal and not losing the asset for nothing. And I also think it's a big bet on Austin's ascension and continued improvement. I also really like the Cameron Carr pick. At the same time, the center market is drying up left and right, and there might not be much on the wing market either. So the Lakers have to get creative here and have to find a way to be aggressive with their assets and with their flexibility to go make something happen. And I've continued to the more I think about it, it's just like, it's probably going to be some form of an overpay. People are not going to like, it's going to be 35 for Watson or like 37 for Kessler or 35 for Kessler and 2 firsts to Utah in a sign and trade, like something like that, because I don't see them just getting like a discount on a stud in restricted free agency or even on the trade market. I think it's going to have to be an aggressive trade offer or an aggressive RFA offer, but we shall see. Maybe I'm wrong and they find a way to catch a break. Matt Green, thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jovan, do you think the next news will be us offering Walker Kessler an offer sheet, $35 million, and put some pressure on Utah? I don't think the next news, again, I've mentioned earlier, there's been some LeBron and Rui buzz in the offseason ether, so I would not be surprised if there's some resolution to one of those situations over the next 24 to 48 hours. Also will depend, what do the Lakers do anything with second round pick or whatever, right? Like they could buy a second round pick, and that might technically be like the next thing that they do today. It depends what LA does in terms of how they want to operate. If you're offering Kessler an offer sheet, you are operating as a cap space team, as an under the cap team. And that is putting real risk in losing LeBron, Rui, Luke, some of those guys, because you're saying we're renouncing all the rights to these guys. We're investing in Kessler. And there is a chance that, if you're LeBron, you might just take the non-taxpayer MLE from one of these teams. If you're Rui, you might not want to wait around because they might not even have enough cap space to keep Rui if they sign Kessler to the 35. So you might just go sign non-taxpayer MLE. And then there's a scenario where you play yourself, you offer Kessler the offer sheet, you think you have the intel maybe that Utah's not going to match. Utah does match. You lose LeBron, you lose Rui. Now you're stuck. You didn't get the center you wanted, and you lost 2 of your 5 best players, that's a pretty tough spot to be in. Now, you would still have a ton of cap space, but at that point, because remember, it's a 48-hour process with the offer sheet. Now you're in a situation where you are likely having to overspend on short-term 1 to 2 year deals with, again, I feel bad for Kelly Oubre. I like Kelly Oubre. I would be fine with Kelly Oubre in a certain context, but he's kind of become my poster boy for like all right, you want Kelly Oubre, Robert Williams, that level of guy. Like, I just don't think that's moving the needle enough. I think if Kelly Oubre is a bench player, I like him. Maybe even if he's a starter and you get Kessler or Duren as well, I can entertain that. And I think he could be like the 5th starter and you move Marcus to the bench. But if your prize of the offseason is like, we added Kelly Oubre and we added a backup center who are going to masquerade as a starter, that's not a good offseason. And so I think the thing here for the Lakers with Kessler is going to be, I don't foresee them, as of right now, to my current knowledge, I don't foresee an offer sheet. I think that the way that this would play out would be they talk to Kessler and his agent, and there's sort of a 3-pronged conversation going on between Kessler and the Lakers and the Jazz, and obviously Kessler and the Jazz. And it comes out to, like, the Lakers can call, or the Lakers can bluff a bit and be like, hey, we're going to pay him 35, we're going to pay him 37, whatever the number is. Why don't you just sign and trade him to us and we'll give you a pick? And Utah will ask for 2, and that'll be its own negotiation. But hey, what if we sign him to 35 and a pick? Just send him over and you get a pick out of it. And like, you're going to lose him. We can even raise it to 37. We could raise it to 40. We could really put you in a compromising position. Just give us Kessler for 35. Here's a pick. Easy work. You got something out of it. And boom. So I think the way, if they land Kessler, is going to be a sign and trade. I don't think it's going to be them outbidding Utah, because I think once you reach around the $35 million mark, that's basically your move. Like, if the Lakers got Kessler for 35, they would be projected to have, and we talked about this with LeBron, they'd be projected to have $13 to $17 million left in cap space. Now, maybe DeAndre Ayton opts out, that adds 8. So now you're at 21 to 25 in cap space. That is not enough for Peyton Watson, I don't think. And you could sign like Rui and Luke. You could sign maybe Rui and Marcus, or Marcus and Luke. Some combination of those 2 guys. You would still have the room exception. So maybe you can keep Rui, Marcus, and Luke, and you just swap in Kessler for LeBron. But that's a pretty big forward size hole in your rotation now. And you would not have the means to replace that. Like, you'd be taking out LeBron. You get your center, but your new starting group is, you're probably going Kessler, Rui, Marcus, Austin, Luka, which, depending on how you feel about that group, maybe that's an upgrade on last year if you feel that way. I think that group is still, there's some rebounding concerns with that starting group. There's still some defensive concerns. I have concerns with Rui, Luka, and Austin together as a trio, that I think Marcus and Kessler can help with it, but you still have some concerns there. So I think the more likely outcome here is a sign and trade for Kessler and not an offer sheet. But technically, you'd be leveraging the threat of an offer sheet. And that's also where, as we talk through what the Lakers are going to do this offseason, if they sign LeBron to, earlier BT Kingsley threw out the 35-40 million. If they sign LeBron to a $40 million deal and Rui to a $20 million deal, even LeBron to 30 and Rui to 20, that alone from a math perspective signals that the Lakers are above the cap. Like, if they re-sign both those guys, that's above the cap, because it would not make any sense to use cap space to re-sign those guys when you could just use bird rights to re-sign those guys. So if they re-sign both those guys, they extend Rui, they re-sign LeBron, they're going above the cap at that point. And at that, you then lose the leverage with Kessler, where Utah is like, well, you can't sign Kessler to the offer sheet. So the Lakers need to, I think for now, keep the optics, keep the mirage that we're going to be a cap space team. But I think the way that this is trending is them going above the cap, and their preference would probably be some form of, like, if you can get the Kessler or the Duren, maybe you pivot quickly and you're like, we'll be an under the cap team and we'll figure out how to make this work. But there is still a version where they can go above the cap and also make it work, as long as they're under the first apron. So that will then depend on, Austin's money set in stone, but what's LeBron's number? What's Rui's number? All these different things. So there's a lot of moving parts with this, but I think if they do pry Kessler or Duren, it's almost certainly going to be a sign and trade. Watson's the one where maybe you could pry him just straight up in restricted free agency, but they might even prefer a sign and trade in that case as well to operate above the cap. LeBum 97, thank you for the super chat. Vando plus 2 picks for Lively, signed Robert Williams III, DA plus Hayes backup. I'm on board with this. That is the type of deal I would give up picks for, is for Lively. I don't know that you need 4 centers at that point. Like, there is some injury risk with Lively and Robert Williams for sure. So you definitely need like a 3rd center just as insurance, but I'd be fine with no DA. And because DA might cost you at that point, just from a financial perspective, you could be picking between like DA or Luke. And I think if you already have Lively, Williams, and Hayes, I would rather just take Luke rather than DA at that point. But this is one of my favorite center rotations, I'll say, that's been floated out there. Like, all 3 lob threats. You have elite defense and rim protection with Lively and Williams. You have like Williams, I think is like a better rim protector and also a better rebounder, but Lively has, he's younger, he's springier, he's got some utility as a passer, and he's also more switchable than Williams. So Lively and Williams to me would like be a dream 1-2 punch going into like realistically, because obviously if you got to think about it through the lens of like Lively's still on a rookie deal, so you could fit Lively and Williams as like a $20-ish million center combo. Whereas if you're getting Kessler or Duren, Williams doesn't make as much sense because now you're paying 35-40 million for Kessler or Duren, then also 10-12 million for Williams. That's a ton of money invested in the center spot, and you should relocate that money elsewhere. So I love this. This is my favorite one. And relatively realistic. 2 picks. I think they probably want 2 picks for Lively just straight up with no Vando. That could be something you could haggle. Definitely could sign Robert Williams. They'll be in the mix for him. And then just depends what happens with DA and Hayes. Rich, thank you for the super chat. Sign Rui, let LeBron walk. It's all about Luka. Why wait? That could be how this plays out. And again, I'm just continuing to check here to make sure nothing's happening. But it just depends on what are you replacing LeBron with. But we had some version of this conversation a little bit earlier. Like, there is an argument that you want to start the next era now, and that's the more optimal approach. And just the thing with LeBron is he's only going to be a Laker for 1, maybe 2 years max. And is there something to rip the Band-Aid off, move on to the next era, maybe your worst next season, but you are building, because I think an underrated element here, and it's definitely been underrated by the Lakers front office, is like, these things take time. There is a continuity element here where most teams, with the exception of the Spurs, and even the Spurs, we saw at the highest level, some of the, I think that was more youth and inexperience, but even some level of continuity, like some of the things where guys are on the wrong, I think some of it's youth, some of it's inexperience, but guys being on the different pages of, I look at you, I start running, you throw the ball to me. Like, the Spurs had at least like 6 of those turnovers through the finals, where it's like just different pages in terms of the eye contact and knowing what a guy is going to do. And that's something that just builds over time. And you look at OKC winning the title, you look at Boston winning the title, you look at Denver winning the title. Those guys had been through wars through multiple seasons together to get to that point. And so I think the biggest argument, if we're have the call them to keep LeBron, call them to move on from LeBron, the biggest argument by far, I think, to move on from LeBron is this at some level, where it's like, you need to build the post LeBron roster and get as many reps as possible with the post LeBron roster. Because if you're keeping LeBron and he's a 27% usage player and he's putting up 22, 7, and 6, and he's still this fulcrum of your offense, what happens when LeBron retires? What are you doing now? Like, and you might not even have the cap space to necessarily replace him depending on his contract. So now all of a sudden you lose LeBron, you lose your starting power forward, and you don't have clear needs to replace him. Like, this is kind of the summer, I guess, to replace him if you are to some degree. But I also understand the flip side of, like, if you have this pressure from Luka to win now, and Luka isn't like, well, let's take a step back and just lose LeBron for nothing, or like replace him with a center that doesn't really address what LeBron brings to the table. There's also that pressure from like the Luka side of, he wants to win now. And there are, I think, very few scenarios I've seen, at least in terms of Laker roster builds, where the Lakers lose LeBron and are better. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think there are some narrow pathways to being a better team next season without LeBron, barring LeBron like just falling off a cliff from a productivity standpoint, which I don't foresee happening. Like, barring that, in terms of like the current level of LeBron versus what the Lakers can build without him, most scenarios are the Lakers are worse on paper, at least, without LeBron. But the upside, obviously, is that you're building whatever is that next iteration of the group, you're building that now, and you get the reps with it. And you can say, all right, maybe this year we lose in the second round, but we had a better showing against San Antonio or OKC. Then we're missing piece X, piece Y this summer and next trade deadline, those 2 transaction cycles. We're going to go get those things. We're going to build that roster. We're going to go into the 2028 playoffs, and we're going to beat OKC or San Antonio, or maybe both of them, and we're going to win the championship. Like, that's kind of the progression here. That if you keep LeBron, doesn't mean you can't do that progression, but he's just such a big part of what they do that it's like, you're almost like amputating a part of the operation and then trying to figure out how to operate without that limb or whatever. It's like, that's pretty tough because LeBron's a huge part of what the Lakers do. And so that's the tension. That's the delicate balance that the Lakers have to figure out. I still think, again, that it's going to just lead itself to him returning and being a part of next year's group. But if it doesn't end up going that way, whether the Lakers choose that or LeBron chooses that, I think one of the upsides, one of the silver linings will be, all right, well, now the roster is in the future. The roster is in like the next iteration, and they can get some reps with that and really evaluate where are the shortcomings and where are the holes that they need to address. Purple and gold pinstripes. Thank you for the super chat. Why does everyone love Sam Presti? It took him 17 years to win 1 championship. If he was Lakers GM, we'd all say he sucks. Anybody can tank away. I like the zag here with the anti-Sam Presti. I think, one of the interesting things with Presti is, there is something to this, right? I'm not going to dismiss this take outright. I also think he's got a giant blemish on his resume with the James Harden trade. I think that is one of the biggest miscalculations in NBA history. And they clearly thought Harden was at a certain level. And look, it's also like hindsight's 2020. Like, I don't think anyone thought James Harden was going to grow to being an MVP, one of the best shooting guards of all time, and grow into the player that he grew into. But like, clearly he had all-star potential in that 6th man role. They made the finals. He was a huge part of that. And they ultimately were haggling in part over a few $1 million. And also, like, he wanted to start, and they were still like, well, we like Thabo Cephalosha as the placeholder too. Like, he needs to play this role. So that was a giant miscalculation that, thousands of hours on podcasts and thousands of words have been spilled over it. So I don't want to relitigate the James Harden trade, but massive blemish that like similar, like on Rob's ledger, he's got the Russ trade, and that was arguably worse or more damaging for the Lakers than the Harden trade was. But like, every GM's got their blemishes, but I think the Harden trade is like a massive miscalculation of a young talent that you just should have paid and made him the starter, or should have gotten a better return, because that return that they got was pretty bad for James Harden. That said, the defense I would have of Presti here is that he has consistently fielded elite teams. Like, the Thunder have become one of those organizations where they are a perennial contender, or at a minimum a perennial playoff team. And it's difficult to be I think we might be like Laker fans are desensitized because the Lakers have been the most consistently great NBA organization. Like even if they just recently caught up to Boston in championships and then Boston surpassed them again in 2024, like the difference in Boston's success versus the Lakers' success is obviously Boston had a ton of success concentrated to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They were in the wilderness in the 90s, and then it eventually took them toward the end of the 2000s with the big three to finally win that championship. They had that drought there for 22 years from 86 to 2008. The Lakers did not have the same drought. The Lakers won, obviously not as many titles to start their history, but Lakers won 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, if you're technically counting 99, 2000, into the 2000s, into the 2010s, into the 2020s. Lakers have won every decade. So the Lakers and Laker fans are they're used to, you're going to win a title every decade. That's just how the Lakers are. I would note that's an exception. Even the Celtics, who have the most championships, have not done that. So like a team being consistently good decade after decade, or a franchise being consistently good decade after decade is rare. The Spurs have been maybe the closest thing to that post-millennium, but even they have had their down periods. And, post-Duncan, they had the 1 year, and then they went through a little bit of a down period, lost Kawhi. Then they had some years there tanking, and then now they have finally bounced back. But they had a half decade there where the Spurs were not good. And so the thing about Presti is that OKC's pretty consistently, since they popped with Westbrook and Durant, they have basically been a contender. Now, they had a couple years with Westbrook where they were more of a playoff level team, then a couple years transitioning to the Shea era with, they did some tanking. I'm not going to say they did not tank, but I would disagree with, they did not tank for like half of that run. They did not tank for even a quarter of that run. They tanked for 3 or 4 years in total, and they ended up bearing the fruits of that. It got amazing. You see all the stuff that they have now, but I think the thing with Presti is that he has consistently drafted well. If you look at, he nailed a ton of picks in the OKC, starting out Seattle, then OKC, and he just had a great draft track record. He's also had these situations with like Nick Collison, Kenrich Williams. He Jedi mind tricks people into taking these like discounts where you rarely look at a Sam Presti contract and say it's a bad contract or Sam Presti lost the negotiation. So I think what Presti has done well, it has not led to the championship success that maybe you would think of when you think of one of the best execs of all time, but he's pretty consistently hit doubles and triples at a minimum, and he wins pretty much every trade, at least on paper. And he wins a lot of the negotiations with guys in direct free agency. And he's also working at a massive disadvantage. If we say the Lakers have the ultimate advantage playing in LA, playing in that market, the Knicks have an advantage, the Heat, some of these big market teams, the Thunder are one of the smallest markets in the league and one of the least appealing places to play in the league, just from a like where you want to live, where you want to be. Like it's not this hotbed of NBA attraction to OKC. So he's also been dealing with that, where it's like they have to draft players of a certain character. It's guys that are going to want to be there for a long term. And like they have an extensive vetting process with their scouting and with their players that they trade for and they sign. So I think he's really built a culture that's sustainable. And I think he's done a ton of great stuff, not without his mistakes, and obviously not with the results that, like, people do talk about Presti as if he's won like 4 or 5 titles. That's just not the reality of the situation. So I think maybe like the legend of Presti has been overblown to a degree. I do think he's a great GM. I think he's consistently done a great job over this near 2-decade run that he's had, or roughly 2 decades, whatever. But I also look at it like he has done a ton of good stuff. And when they make a pick, when they trade for someone, when they sign someone, more often than not, especially the last few years, it's been like identifying the Giddey Caruso trade, going out and paying Isaiah Hartenstein, drafting AJ Mitchell, J-Dub and where he went. And they had a decision to make with Chet. They chose right. They could have chose Jabari Smith. They chose Chet. Like he's hit a lot of things. Like, so I would also say that he did have a very high approval rating, but the last few years is where I think it's gone to a different level, where he went from like really good to great to like legendary status, where I do think he is one of the best execs of all time now, but he's got to win more championships, of course. When we talk about the Jerry Wests and some of the all-time, the RC Bufords and some of these guys, like he does need more rings ultimately to be at like that ultimate level, in my opinion. This one's from Max Gomez. Thank you for the super chat. Jack in Slovenia, a tactic to be better with Luka. So am I missing? I'm not quite sure what this. Is this what's the reference here? Are you saying is Jake Laravia out in Slovenia? I don't know who Jack is, unless there's something in my face that I'm missing. I'm searching on Twitter. I do not see what this is in reference to. If someone can let me know in the chat. Dustin notes, no way Presti's overrated. Like, how the hell do you find gems like McCain, Isaiah Joe, et cetera, who are low on the drop? I mean, that's where like the last few years, I think he's been goated. I just think he's straight up been goated. Oh, Max Gomez says, Jackson, got you. So the spelling threw me off there because Jackson is X-S-O-N. A tactic to be better with Luka? Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure on some level, like, I think there's multiple layers here. So one, Jackson Hayes isn't good enough to play for Team USA. So oftentimes when you see some of these players who aren't good enough to be on Team USA, they will find an international team to play for. And while Jackson doesn't have any outright Slovenian background or whatever, like he has clicked with Luka. They share an agent. They have a great rapport. And I'm sure at some level it was like Craig favor to Luka and like kind of attaching himself to Luka. And now he, I think, is probably going to be a Laker for quite a bit here. So yeah, but also there is to this point, like you get the extra layer of continued chemistry continuity. Already those two, I mean, they click from day one, but they've just continued to click. And I think Luka does unlock the best version of Jackson, and we've seen that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it does continue to strengthen their bond and just take it to a different level on and off the court. So I understand why Jackson did that. B Jordan 23, thank you for the super chat. Would Kelly Oubre be good for bench role? Yes, I know I've kind of made Kelly Oubre my unofficial poster boy in terms of like a disappointing offseason, but in a certain role, even potentially in the fifth starter role, if you get a great center, I would totally be open to Kelly Oubre. If he's in the, let's say, $12 to $15 million range, maybe even, I don't know, 10 to 12, like somewhere in that general range of 10 to 15 or so, and potentially in a bench role, or even as a short-term starting solution if you can't find the wing of the future, I'm cool with that. I think Kelly Oubre, it's funny because he had a quote recently, I believe, a couple of months ago, where he was like, I think he was asked about free agency or something, and he was like, I just, or if you're like maybe confident in re-signing with the Sixers or whatever, and he was like, I put up numbers, I perform, and like teams just don't seem to want to keep me. And like there was kind of a layer of self-awareness there that I liked from Kelly Oubre, but he is, I think he's a very versatile player who would have a lower usage role than maybe he's ever had in his career as a Laker, and would certainly be shifting more toward being more of a catch and shoot spot up guy around Luka and Austin. But you look at this past season, shot 36% on threes. I mean, the 3-point shooting is where I have the biggest questions, because basically from his rookie season in 2015 through 2 seasons ago, he had been between 29% and 35%. And only at 35% twice. So he's pretty consistently been a below average 3-point shooter. This past year, he popped a bit at 36% on 5 attempts per game, which is right there closer to a league average shooter, but that's like a decent amount of volume. That's like at least mid-tier volume, 5 attempts per game, 14 points per game, 5 rebounds, still a steal and a half. So he's a defensive playmaker. I think he's one of those guys that is a little overrated defensively because he he'll slap the ground and kind of play with a certain amount of energy, but it's not necessarily leading to like high level stops. Like he's not like an all defense guy, but he does 1.9 stocks this past year, 2 the year before. Like he's constantly in that 2-ish stocks per game range, including getting some blocks. He does have long arms and athleticism to leverage defensively. I like him in transition. I like him as a cutter. He does have some off the dribble chops in terms of his shot creation. And he's just an athletic, versatile player that would not be my preferred choice to be the starter over Marcus. But I think he's only 30, so you could potentially leverage him as he's a younger alternative to Marcus, where again, if it's a short-term situation, maybe it's a 2-year deal, you could have him as the starter, reduce Marcus's role and wear and tear a little bit. And if you get the right center, I'm cool with it. If it is Robert Williams and Kelly Oubre, I think that's a little disappointing. But yeah, I know I've referenced Oubre a lot in like a negative context, but I actually do like Oubre, especially if he's a bench player. If you somehow walk out of this summer with like a solid center, a solid 2-way wing, and your bench is like Marcus, Oubre, and Rui plus Jackson or whatever, that's a pretty solid bench. So I do love him in a bench role, and I potentially like him in a starter role if there's no alternatives and LA invests in the center spot. If there are better alternatives or the Lakers aren't investing in the center spot, that's where I have a little bit of an issue with him as a starter. But bench role, sign me up regardless. Said the lad, thank you for the super chat. Has the team developed its international scouting team? I've heard different things in terms of how built out the scouting department is. My understanding is it continues to be a work in progress. Now, I think one of the things that was misrepresented at the time was that the Lakers did not gut the entire scouting department when they made the changes at the beginning of the season. It was primarily the Bus brothers and some other people, but they still had, to my understanding, roughly like half of their scouting department still in place. And they have been going through the season with a depleted scouting department, but the plan is to continue to build that out. I think one of the holdups here has been the assistant GM spot that they are trying to hire for is the assistant GM that is going to be in charge of the draft and scouting and player development. So that's a big pillar that you ideally, in terms of order of operations, you would ideally have that guy in place. Then that guy is helping with building out the scouting department because he's making sure it's guys that he signs off on, that he vibes with, that he believes in, that he has a rapport with, and you're just making sure that everyone's on the same page. Like that's you build top down in terms of front offices, and so that's where I think that holdup is kind of been a decent roadblock for the Lakers right now in terms of building out the scouting department and the rest of the front office. So they got to hire that assistant GM like ASAP. I mean, it's crazy. They just had the draft and you saw the war room. Like people were cracking their jokes, but you look at every other war room and with a couple of exceptions, and like pretty much every war room was at least double the size of the Lakers, if not triple the size of the Lakers. So that's where it's like the Lakers look, there was one, I think it was Atlanta. It was a funny shot where they cut to it. There's a couple guys in the back eating pizza, just chilling. And like, obviously not everyone in there is actively in, like there is a hierarchy. There is the president, the GM, like the heavy hitters that are making the final decisions. But you do want a certain amount of bodies in the room, a certain amount of camaraderie, a certain amount of sharing ideas and bouncing off like, okay, let's take a quick vote. We could draft player X or player Y. And like, everyone has their boards and you're making some quick decisions or hey, team X is offering player Y to us. What do we think? And like, it's better to have 10 to 15 voices in there than like 5 or 6. And so I think ultimately you're going to have Rob being the primary guy with the couple of assistant GMs and then Kurt Rambis. Those are going to be the quartet making the key decisions. But and then if it's the draft, obviously Tony Bennett as well. But they got to hire the position. They got to do that. So that's something that they got to figure out. But I don't, at least to my knowledge, no like material change has happened in the international scouting. Easy 111. Thank you for the super chat. I think Luka asks out if LeBron comes back. Not only does LeBron affect spending power, but his farewell year could be a distraction leading to deferrals and exhibitions at the expense of winning. Don't waste Luka's prime. You're going for it. You're ripping the Band-Aid off here. I think my read, and I would say this is with basically everything the Lakers do this summer. And this is where there's some nuance with it, because I think sometimes what happens is when you say something like that, then it gets thrown at the feet of the superstar. And I think LeBron has dealt with some of this with some of the moves that the Lakers have made where people have put it on LeBron. And naturally that's going to happen with Luka, where it's going to be, oh, well, they had Luka's blessing to do this. So like Luka's complicit in some of this. But my read would be, if the Lakers do bring back LeBron, that is something they're running by Luka. I do not think if Luka is truly against LeBron coming back to the degree that you are implying here, and it's a situation where Luka would leave or ask out if LeBron comes back, I truly believe the Lakers would move on from LeBron. And it would be, and maybe they're going to massage how they handle the situation, but I truly believe it would be as simple as Luka doesn't want LeBron back, LeBron's not back. Like, I think that's how that would go. Now, the fact that is not how it has played out up to this point, and at least behind the scenes seems to be how that's trending, to me indicates that's not how Luka would handle this. I think, again, if it's that simple and the Lakers are getting input and Luka's like, I want you to keep Austin. I don't want you to trade Austin. I want a center. I want shooting. At some point, LeBron's going to come up in that conversation, and we have not inherently gotten clarity as to how Luka explicitly feels about LeBron, but I think we'll have a sense soon in the next week or so in terms of LeBron's either back or he's not. And I think either way doesn't mean Luka kept him or Luka pushed him out, but Luka is going to has a massive seat at this table. And if Luka would be upset if LeBron was leaving, that's a factor. But also, if Luka doesn't want LeBron, that's a big factor as well. So my read would be whether LeBron is back or not is on some level dependent on how Luka feels about that. Now, of course, you have the actual negotiation with LeBron, and Luka could say, hey, I want LeBron back, but if you can't negotiate with LeBron and make it all work, then that's like the Lakers can't force LeBron to be back. LeBron has to want to be back. He has to want, he has to like the contract and the pitch that the Lakers are making to him. But assuming that Luka signs off on it, then I think the Lakers will move ahead, and I think that's the way this is trending. If Luka doesn't want, I think it would be foolish for Luka to not want LeBron back, but also not voice that, and then them re-sign LeBron, and then him be like, hey, well, I didn't want him back, but I didn't tell you guys. So that's not, I don't think that's how this works. I think there's an open line of communication. They're having constant dialogue about different options and different pathways to building the roster. And maybe it is a contingent situation where Luka's like, if you can get me player X, Y, or Z, I'm cool with no LeBron. If you can't, I want LeBron back. And maybe the Lakers are operating under something like that. But I think with how much Luka has already voiced certain things to the Lakers, I think it would be a mishandling of the situation from his perspective. Forget even him almost testing them and being like, hey, well, I didn't want LeBron, but you didn't read my mind and you kept him, so now I want out. It's this is an important offseason. So if he really doesn't want LeBron back, he needs to voice that. And then it's on the Lakers whether they listen to that or how they handle that. But I would be pretty surprised with how LA is moving if Luka said, I don't want LeBron back, and they still brought him back. That to me would not jive, especially if they might already have to massage the situation with the center spot and be like, hey, we got you a B-list center, not an A-list center. On top of that, if it's I wanted LeBron back and you didn't bring him back, or I don't want LeBron back and you do bring him back, I think that might be too much to deal with. So I don't have a clear sense on how Luka feels about this and where he's at, but based on the intel I've gathered, the intel that's been reported, it does seem like there is mutual interest between the Lakers and LeBron in continuing. And that to me would indicate Luka might not be cheering on top of roofs for that, but he's at least signing off and being like, I'm cool with this and I'm open to LeBron being back. So I understand why you're going here. I can see why you would go to this point, but I don't think the Lakers would bring him back, especially at whatever number it ends up being, without Luka's blessing. I think that would be a gross mishandling of the situation on LA's part, and that would maybe it would lead to him asking out, but that I would be shocked if they handled it that way. Yu-Gi-Oh! Dual Channel, thank you for the super chat. Follow up, Braun's probably retiring after next year. Why would the Lakers ever want to deal with life after Braun during Luka's contract year versus now? Fair question, and that is it's a fair question. And again, this is, I think I see both sides of the LeBron discussion and the argument to keep him versus the argument to lose him. I think the best pushback I could have to this is, depending on what the option is to replace LeBron in terms of this summer, you could potentially argue that that alternative isn't good enough to take the step back this season. And because again, like if you just lose LeBron and it's just as simple as like you run it back, you add the whatever, someone for the non-taxpayer MLE, you don't add an RFA of any consequence, and it's just basically like this roster minus LeBron and like one addition, I think you're better with LeBron. Now, if it's an overhaul and you're like, hey, we could get Peyton Watson and Walker Kessler, or we could get Peyton Watson and Jalen Duren, or we could trade for another, a different player, or make a couple moves and like really reshape the roster, and it's going to be set up for the future without LeBron, that's a different conversation, because now it's like, I think the key here would be, don't hold yourself back from building a better roster in like 2 to 3 years to appease the present. But at the same time, if you don't have that option to build that roster over, or that next version of the group over the next couple of years, it might be better to just stick with the alternative of like build the best short-term roster. And then you're going to like, you are creating a future problem for yourself, but maybe you're good enough in the short term, depending on how you build the roster, to win a championship. But certainly I'm like, I understand what you're saying. And I think that's the biggest argument for moving on, is like, you just build the next iteration, the life after Braun, as you're saying now. But there's also some risk in that. Like it really depends on the build and the names and like what the contract structure is. It's hard to say it in a vacuum that they are inherently in a better spot, because again, there's a scenario where they lose him, they don't replace him with anyone of consequence, and they don't have cap space next summer. And like, that would be, I think, an all around L, because you're worse now. You don't really have the flexibility necessarily to improve the roster meaningfully next summer. And then what are you doing? All right. Like, so it's tough to say it in a vacuum, but I understand that sentiment. And I think that's the strongest moving on from LeBron argument, if you're making that. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. When people rage baiting are indiscernible from people saying worthless stuff like, quote, we're worse than Utah now, quote, chat needs a timeout. A bunch of you are flat out embarrassing right now. So I've not been, I've just been seeing the super chats. I've not been seeing the chat. So I knew people were going to crash out about the Austin contract. I was not surprised by that, but I guess the chat is going off in all different directions right now. I appreciate the heads up, Shabugan. The next one from Notorious CRG. Thank you for the super chat. I like AR. Lakers overpaid. Now we go to LeBron and ask him to take almost half. Are we supposed to count on a 28-year-old to get better year over year? So the one pushback or the nuance within the Austin conversation with the contract, and I've been trying to kind of find, because even I was a little surprised, to be completely honest. Like, I thought it was higher than he was going to get, but since then, with what I've learned, with what has been reported, my understanding is there was a real threat from Brooklyn and Detroit. Like, I don't think the Lakers, maybe that's like, I know there's been a segment of people who are like, oh, that's BS. That's a bluff. That's not true. Like, that's just cope or whatever. If that's the case, then obviously, like, I think at that, you would hope that the Lakers would just come out and own it at that point and be like, no, there was a competition, but we view Austin as a max player. We wanted to give Austin the max. Like, boom, that's the deal. If they have to manufacture a storyline then like already I have an issue with that. Cause I'm like, if you don't feel like he's a max guy, but you only paid him it because of the competition, like that's just bad process. My understanding is that's not how this played out. They did view him as a max level guy, but they also got strong armed to a degree based on Brooklyn and Detroit into paying that. And they couldn't try to leverage, like if there's no market for Austin, you could have leveraged that down and maybe it's 40 million AAV or 42 million AAV. But when you have teams offering him 44 AAV or trying to position themselves to, in the case of Detroit, that is a real competition. And that's where, so I guess like two things can be true here in terms of you can think the Lakers overpaid for what Austin is worth in terms of his actual production, his on-court value, what he brings to the table. But it's difficult to say they overpaid through the context of there were a couple teams interested in a contract at a little bit less than that. So maybe LA could have just matched that contract or gone like a smidge over. They obviously went a bit over and went just like full max for the 4 years. But that's where I guess the overpaid conversation is like you can say he's overpaid based on his production or based on the level you think he's at. But there were a couple of teams interested in a max contract. So through that lens, it's like if someone's going to pay Austin the max and you pay him a max that's a little bit more to retain him, at least two teams, if not potentially more, viewed him as a max level player. So the market, like this, I think this is a situation more so where the market dictated review Austin as a max level guy. And if the market's saying that, then the Lakers have to make a choice there. You either pay him as a max guy or he walks. And I think, again, looking at those specific teams, I don't think you're getting Duren for Austin. And Brooklyn had nothing to offer the Lakers of real value for like the short term. So they could have thrown in Claxton, but like I think the Lakers would have wanted more for giving up Austin. So they're in a position where it's basically lose Austin for nothing or pay Austin. And they chose to pay Austin. And we'll see how the contract ages and if he continues to improve. In terms of a 28-year-old getting better year over year, I would not rule out Austin continuing to improve. I think once you hit like 30, like I think there's a runway here of like a year or two. I'm not saying he's going to improve into 30, 31, 32, but like I think especially with skill-based players, which Austin is more of a skill-based player than an athleticism-based player, although he is pretty quick relatively. There is an element of like he can continue to like we've seen late bloomers. I think of like Steve Nash as a guy who was a bit of a late bloomer, popped closer to mid to late 20s and then kept ascending to a certain level. He's not Steve Nash, to be clear, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Austin continues to improve and refine his game over the next year or two. I mean, just as a starting point, needs to get better as a catch and shoot guy. It needs to be more reliable as a catch and shoot guy. So I think if Austin even just keeps the current level of ball handling, refines the two areas for me are like if he can refine some of the high turnover games that he had against OKC, San Antonio, like dealing with the ball pressure and become a better shooter, that alone takes his game to a different level where having the off the dribble juice and the shot creation and the passing and like those things I don't think are going away. And even if they stay at this current level, they're at a pretty high level. I think the issue with his game to some degree has been the shooting in the playoffs, the turnovers at times, especially this past year, and the defense has regressed in general over the past couple of years. So I think of the three, the shooting and the turnovers are more controllable than the defense. And so if Austin can be a consistent 40% catch and shoot guy, which he has flashed at previously in his career, and also refine the reads and be a better and more efficient passer and playmaker, that alone, I think, takes him to a different tier and addresses two of his three major flaws or three of his like most prominent flaws, I'll say right now. The defensive one, part of that will also just be continuing to stay healthy, take care of his body, and physically maybe try to get to a different level or get into the best shape of his career. But that one I think is a little trickier to address. The other two, though, if he's a 40% catch and shoot guy plus a more efficient ball handler and playmaker, like that's a very valuable player who I think does level up into being worth closer to the contract that he just signed. So, but yeah, this is where I got aggregated on the whole LeBron Austin thing and me saying Austin was more of a priority. it got turned into this whole thing of Austin versus LeBron. And if Austin's more of a priority, then they shouldn't keep LeBron. I put out a statement. I did not retract the statement. I just added clarity of like, it's not an either or situation. And the Lakers do value LeBron and want to keep him, but Austin was clearly the priority over LeBron. He is going to make more money than LeBron's going to make. And that's just the reality of the situation. And so I don't think LeBron's going to take half or be asked to take half necessarily, but it will be 40% less or something like that. That is a big chunk, but it's also tough because you're signing Austin to a 4-year deal. You're signing LeBron to a 1 or 2 year deal. So they're on different timelines in terms of their placement in LA's hierarchy and just the core of the team. But yeah, it's obviously going to be something you have to sell to LeBron to some degree. Now, at the same time, as I mentioned, especially if they go under the cap, Austin's money does not impact LeBron's money. Above the cap, it might, depending on how close LA is to the first apron. Next one from Nosferatu. Thank you for the super chat. Luka AR Rui lineup numbers should give confidence. Yeah, there is something to this. I think a lot of that was the beginning of the season. So I'm a little lower on that trio in particular. If we look up, I'll pull it up right now. Let me see. So here's I'll pull this up here and share it with you guys. So if you look at, I'm on databaller.com. This is NBA Wowie lineup data. So you have the trio of Austin, Luka, and Rui, plus 7 points per 100 possessions, 120.5 offensive rating. That's elite. That'd be a top 3 mark in the league. 113.2 defensive rating. That's like, at least to my recollection on the regular season numbers, that's closer to average-ish, maybe slightly above average. I want to double check that just to make sure I'm being accurate here. But 113. Oh, this is players. Looking at teams here, 113.2 defensive rating. That would be the 11th best defense in the league. So borderline top 10 defense. That's a good mark. You take that mark, obviously. Luka and Rui, plus 3.1. You see the defense really drops. So this is Luka and Rui with Austin off. Defense drops. Just Austin and Luka, though, without Rui, plus 17. And the defense. So actually, if you look at it, when you have Austin and Luka without Rui, they are crushing. And that's in 438 minutes. You add Rui, they get 5 points per 100 possessions worse and on both sides of the ball. And so with Rui in there, they're actually worse on both sides. Whereas if you contrast that with, like, replace Austin with Rui and they get a little better off, compared to that pairing, they're much worse defensively. The Luka Rui pairing is much worse than the Luka Austin pairing defensively, sans the third guy. And it's also worse offensively. And then you look at Austin and Rui, that's basically, so I would actually argue that the lineup data, like the overall lineup data with the 3 on the floor, is positive at plus 7.3. That's a solid rate or solid number. You look at the more like diving into the numbers and it's like, it's better than plus 7.3, plus 17. Plus 17 is much better. And that's with Austin and Luka without Rui. And then the other combinations are underwhelming. Luka and Rui without Austin, plus 3, not that good. Austin and Rui without Luka, plus 0.7, also not that good. Just Luka on without those two, minus 1. All those 3 off, minus 3. Just Austin on, minus 1.2. And just Rui on without those 2, actually plus 5.2. So that's maybe also something to Rui kind of being staggered from those guys and being more of a bench guy. So the lineup data with those 3 is still like positive, I guess, in terms of the actual trio. But I would contend that Rui, Luka, and Austin is a pretty problematic defensive trio that I think needs to be staggered to a degree, unless it depends who the other 2 guys are defensively in the lineup. But it's got to be better than DeAndre Ayton and Marcus Smart. That would be something. So again, maybe you go Rui as the 4, you lose LeBron, but then you better go get that 5 and that 3 that defend at a high level. That would be my read on that. Next one from Miss Optimist. Thank you for the super chat. this quote, all about Luka thing, is the goal to build the best basketball team possible or a cult? So I understand where you're coming from, and I understand some of the pushback to this, but I think the thing here, and this is, I think you're starting to see this a little bit in San Antonio with like, they just went and added a couple centers. This is not uncommon. The Heat didn't do this as much because they had a big three, but like you like go through LeBron's career. Cleveland tried to do this late in the first tenure of LeBron. Miami has always tried to operate more like team above stars. So that's like maybe an exception, but like Cleveland, they draft Andrew Wiggins. They immediately trade him for Kevin Love, like number one pick with all this potential. Obviously didn't end up becoming the player we expected for number one, but like that was a ballsy move to flip Andrew Wiggins for Kevin Love, and clearly a win now move that was geared toward winning a championship as soon as possible. Cleveland made a bunch of short-term moves. LeBron held their feet to the fire with short contracts. Then he goes to LA, and they obviously all the young Lakers in for AD, and they ultimately do the Russ trade. And like, there has been an element of trying to build the best possible roster. And like, what does LeBron want? Now, I would also argue they went away from that the last few years, especially post Russ. And I think people outside of Bronny and like having clutch guys on minimum contracts, they have not really done what LeBron has wanted. He's wanted some big swings that they just have not taken for a variety of reasons. So point being, like, you look at Houston and how they operated with James Harden. You look at like stars of a certain level get certain treatment from their friend. I mean, like the Clippers and Kawhi, they trade Shea at 1 million picks for Paul George. They do allegedly some illegal, cap circumvention, and like they went all in on Kawhi Leonard and appeasing him. So like this is kind of how it goes when you're at a certain level, and when you're Luka, who's unequivocally a top 5 player in the league, especially a guy who has some leverage, like didn't have to sign the contract extension, but is also a year away from potentially putting the Lakers' feet to the fire and being like, hey, I don't know if I want to re-sign here. Like, you guys haven't built a really good roster. I think it's a confluence of like Luka's at a certain level. He's still in his prime or entering his prime. And he also has some leverage here with like, I think he did the Lakers a favor by signing the contract extension when he did, not putting pressure on them. But then it was also a short-term deal where now he's a year away from exerting some pressure on them. So like they are feeling the heat of Luka plays a certain way. And Luka has had success with that way. He has consistently had some of the best offensive teams in the league, and he's made a conference finals and finals as the driving force playing Luka ball. But the thing with Luka ball is there is a way to play Luka ball, and you can try to fit square pieces into round holes and vice versa. But like really the way to play Luka ball is to put Luka pieces around Luka ball. And the closest we've seen to that was 2024, and they made the finals. But you need athletic, rim running, rim protecting, rebounding centers, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively. You need elite athletes on the perimeter, Derek Jones Jr., PJ Washington, and guys who can defend multiple positions, have defensive utility. You need the backcourt running mate that can produce at an all-star level, Jalen Brunson, Kyrie Irving, and now the Lakers are trying to replicate that with Austin Reaves. So I would say it's less about being a cult and more so about Luka's the franchise player. It is typical of franchise players to get a certain amount of preferential treatment and the roster be built around their proclivities. I would also argue that Luka there are some guys who I think of like a guy like a Jason Tatum is sort of a blank canvas. He has this Swiss Army knife utility to him. Peak LeBron, Swiss Army knife utility. LeBron was like playing small ball center in Miami. Played point guard to start his career, small ball 5, 4 and 5 at times in Miami, then goes back to Cleveland, is back to being a 3, but also has the utility to play small. And like, you can build any type of roster around those types of guys, but there are certain guys who have a more certain playing style. And I think Luka's under that box, and he's also special enough to warrant and justify it. So it's like, I think the Lakers are trying to build the best basketball team possible, but if we acknowledge that Luka's the best player, the Lakers are feeling some heat here to build the best possible roster around him, make the team a contender, that you can go, hey, well, Miles Turner is the best center available. Let's go get Miles Turner. But is Miles Turner going to screen and roll? Because that's how the offense is going to function. The offense is not going to be, we brought in Miles Turner, let's revamp how Luka plays. Let's revamp the entire offense. Instead of having that rim running lob threat, we're going to pick and pop a ton. We're going to be a 5-out team, and we're not going to get that downhill pressure. No, that's not how it's going to function. What's going to happen is it's going to be, hey, Miles Turner, you're a lob threat now, and you'll occasionally pick and pop. That's your new responsibilities, and it's going to look a lot like DeAndre Ayton, where there's going to be some reticence on his part. It's not going to be the cleanest fit. It's not going to be the most effective way to use him, and it's just not going to work. So I do think when you think about building the best possible team around Luka, the Lakers have the backcourt piece. Now they need the defense and the athletes and shooting on the perimeter, and then you need the center spot. And that's the general framework that worked in 2022, worked in 2024, and I think can work again in 2027 if the Lakers build it right. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive to build around Luka and build the best basketball team possible. But I think if you accept that if you are building around Luka, you need to build a certain way, then the key should be leaning into that and building that way. And some guys have more utility or versatility within their style. That's not as much Luka. So if you are making Luka your franchise player and trying to maximize his prime and trying to build the best roster possible to his skill set, that is a certain path. And that's where I think some of this tension is coming from when we have these discussions about players is we could talk through the Miles Turner, Porzingis, Isaiah Stewart. Those guys just don't do the center job well enough for what the Lakers specifically need from a 5 on a Luka team. It's just that simple. And then we could talk about some of the wings, but if they don't defend or they're not athletic or they don't shoot the ball well enough, they might not be good enough for a Luka team either. So I think you gotta you just gotta strike that balance there in terms of you do want the most talent, most skill, best team possible, but you also have to build it to optimize Luka, because if you're not trying to optimize Luka, then what's the point of all this, right? The way, because that Dallas team was not the best team in the West on paper, right? They were a 5 seed, I believe. In the way that they punched above their weight was they put the optimal roster around Luka, and it became greater than the sum of its parts because you had all these cogs that just fit around him perfectly to his style of play. They protected him defensively, but then they also complemented him at the highest level. And you had multiple lob threats, PJ Washington, Derek Jones, plus the center. You had Kyrie as that high-level scorer and backcourt mate, and it just all clicked. The Lakers are trying to replicate some version of that. And so I would not view that as cultish or entirely adhering to what Luka wants. But there is an element of if you're going to play Luka ball, you might as well try to maximize Luka ball. If you're going to say you're playing Luka ball, but then not get Luka players, that doesn't really make sense. And then at that point, you need to pick is Luka the right guy for you, or do you have to really change the system to fit him? And it's it's either or. And the Lakers are operating as if he's the right guy. So obviously you got to try to maximize that. The Tar Heel 2010, thank you for the super chat. How do the Lakers overcome their best players making the most money being bad defenders? Your 1-2 punch should complement each other. I think this is a fair question. I would contend that I think Luka and Austin are not as bad defensively as the reputation suggests. I think if you look at even the lineup data we were just looking at with Rui on the floor, they were still a top 11 defense. With Rui off the floor, that 108.3 defense, that would be the second best defense in the NBA behind Oklahoma City. And that's in a decent sample size. That's in 438 minutes with Luka and Austin on and Rui off. So there is JJ and his analytics staff said lineup data starts to stabilize around 200 minutes. So you're at over double that sample size. That I think there is this cognitive dissonance where people see the Luka and Austin low light reels and they just immediately go to they suck at defense or you can't build a good defense. Again, with those two guys on and Rui off, they had a defense of a certain caliber. We could also apply the same thing to LeBron in place of Rui, and you see Austin, Luka on, LeBron off, 108.8. It drops by 0.5 from the Austin, Luka on, no Rui. So it works. I don't. Now, will it work in the playoffs? I don't have the answer to that because it did not work against Minnesota. We later found out Austin was physically compromised, but like whatever. We could still say didn't work against Minnesota, lost in 5. Embarrassing, disappointing, underwhelming. They were the favorite. They had home court. They blew it. Okay, bad. This past year, though, we didn't get to see it. That was the biggest unfortunate development with the Luka injury. Like, of course, it compromised the Lakers' ceiling, and that was the biggest, unfortunate part of it. But to me, the thing that stunk about that was like you just didn't get to see Austin and Luka together and what that looked like with LA committing to it. So I would push back slightly in that I think they both are net negative defenders in general, but Luka is a solid defensive playmaker. There's a reason why he's constantly up there with the steals and deflections. Austin is among the league leaders in charges. Luka started to take more charges. So like, I think they both have stretches where they are average or even positive defenders. Now, I would say in general, like it's not the foundation you want to build a defense. Like if you are building a defense around Luka and Austin, like you clearly need all defense talent to support those guys. I'm not denying that whatsoever. I'm just saying, I think they sometimes get talked about like they're Trae Young and they are not a 6'1" low activity defender who does not like to rotate and just can be physically overwhelmed to that degree as a non-factor on the defensive end. Like that's just not Luka's 6'8", 240 pounds, Austin 6'5", 205, 210. Like there's just a size element where they do provide a certain amount of size. Now, can Luka be blown by? Can Luka sometimes struggle with rotations or making multiple efforts on a rotation? Yes. Can Austin be physically overwhelmed by bigger players, wings and bigs in the paint or mismatches? Yes. Can Austin be scored over? We saw AJ Mitchell cook them in the playoffs. Yes. I think there's a level of nuance here, but I would push back a little bit on just saying they're outright both bad defenders. I think Austin had some rough moments in the playoffs for sure, and some rough moments at times in the season. Luka, I think the first couple months were rough for him defensively. And then around January, he turned a page and largely was average the rest of the way and even had stretches where he was above average. So I would say they are certainly flawed and limited defenders and overall probably net out as net negatives. And it does inform how you build the roster because if you are starting with Luka and Austin, you need an elite rim protector and at least one elite wing defender. I would argue an elite wing defender plus a good bench defender. And like those 3 guys need to be a key part of your top like 7 is like 3 of the other 5 spots need to be like elite defenders. And that's where I think the Lakers kind of fall short. And that's some of the limitations with the current roster. In terms of them complementing each other though, I do think they complement each other because again, the lineup data has been overwhelmingly positive. Like I know the results have not necessarily been there, although I would argue in the regular season they've been there. The playoffs, again, disappointing first round. And then this past year, I would argue the Lakers actually overachieved relative to who is available, beating Houston. And then OKC, I mean, no Luka, you're getting swept. You might have gotten swept anyway, but like, I think they complement each other better than this suggests. And I know there's a sentiment that they don't. And also they're better defensively than this. That said, what I look at is I look at New York, and I've made this comparison many times before, especially recently, but New York had their starting point of, they eventually started with Randall and Brunson, but they pivoted to Brunson and Cat as like, that's our core. Those are our 2 foundational guys. Those are our 2 all-star, all-NBA guys. How do you complement those guys? And I know like the order of operations here was they added Cat a little bit later, but they also looked at Brunson and were like, hey, we need big wings around Brunson to protect Brunson. So OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart. And overall, if you're looking at the starting point of Jalen Brunson and Cat and you say, what do we need around Jalen Brunson and Cat? You would land at the same conclusion of OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart. So I think if you're starting with Luka and Austin, there are some real strengths. Like you have 2 guys who are 20, I mean, in Luka's case, 30 plus a night, Austin's case, 20 plus a night, high level of shot creation, passing, basketball IQ. They were 2 of the top 10 pick and roll performers this season in terms of points per possession out of pick and rolls. So you have 2 elite pick and roll practitioners. That's a high level to start with offensively, to say nothing of, again, at least for whatever reason, when LeBron and Rui were off the floor, they were awesome defensively with Luka. And that to me signals that there's kind of a roster construction limitation here where like LeBron isn't going to do the dirty work defensively every night, at least not until the playoffs. And Rui isn't really capable of doing that. So it's like, I do think ideally you have some form of, it would be great to have Walker Kessler, Aaron Gordon, and Jaden McDaniels or something like that around Luka and Austin, where you have this massive front court, all plus defenders, and you have a certain amount of shooting and shot creation too from the Gordon and McDaniel spots. Like, that's obviously an expensive roster, and that's difficult, if not impossible. I mean, it's impossible to acquire those 3 specific guys together. But point being is like, that's the type of roster build the Lakers need. They need a certain amount of size and defense, two-way utility, and they need to complement those guys that way. And that's where, again, when we talk about, like, I'm probably a little bit lower than consensus, at least among the fan base, on Rui and Luke and their long-term utility, because I look at, they fit the shooting bill, but they do not fit. Like, Rui's an above average athlete who often plays closer to like an average. Like, he does not leverage his athleticism as well as he could or should, in my opinion. A low motor player for the most part up until the playoffs, and a below average rebounder. And this past season was a below average defender. Luke is also limited rebounder, limited defender, and got played off the floor at times in the playoffs. So it's like, those 2 guys, I just think if the starting point is Luka and Austin, which it clearly is, the Lakers have now invested this season, they're going to pay those guys $88 million. So if that's your starting point, every brick that you lay off of that foundation needs to be complementing them. And I would argue the way to complement them the most is actually defense and athleticism, even more than shooting. I think shooting is important. You still need the shooting, but I would argue defense and athleticism is even more important than shooting, in my opinion, for like how to maximize those 2. So that lends itself to some interesting roster decisions for the Lakers. I mean, like, how does LeBron fit into that? How does Rui fit into that? How does Luke fit into that? Those are questions the Lakers have to figure out. But in terms of, I guess, to overcome it, I think you have to overcome it with making up for it with the front court. And again, Luka's a front court defender, so I actually view it as like, you need a backcourt defender, a wing defender, and an interior defender, a rim protector. And those are the 3 ways that I think you build out. Like, maybe, I went with 3 front court guys. Maybe the real way is something like Kessler, a Gordon or McDaniels, and like a Derek White. And I'm using, like, I would say more so like archetypes here rather than those specific players, because those are all high-end players that it would be difficult to acquire. But like, you could go the Kessler rim protector type, and that's like rim runner, rebounder, rim protector. Then you could go one of 2 ways with either the Gordon hyper athletic strong 4 who has developed as a shooter and off-ball player, or you go with like the rangy McDaniels 6'9", guy who's like outline of a 3-and-D guy, but now has become a solid shooter and has off-ball juice and scoring utility, but very high-level defender. And then the Derek White general, like, he didn't shoot the ball well this past season, but 3-and-D-ish guard. Like, I think you need basically a 3-and-D guard, a 3-and-D wing, and a rim protecting center. That would be my way to optimize this. Then you have Luka on the lesser front court guy, Austin on the lesser backcourt guy, and that's how you build the defense from there. But with some of the names the Lakers are looking at, some of the names on the roster, like, they don't check the 3-and-D box. They don't check the 2-way box, and that's something that they got to figure out. All right. Next one from Rola Pacastola. Thank you for the super chat. I don't know about you, but there should be no excuses to improve this team. Being below the cap, you should be able to snag players from being shed/traded. I'm with you. Sometimes one of my favorite things is, I try not to pay too much attention to some of the negative comments or whatever, some of the trolling sometimes. But one of my favorite things is, like, there'll be the occasional comment that I see someone accuse me of like defending the front office, when I would say I'm one of the most critical people that has a platform in terms of criticizing the front office. And that's been, even when I was a beat writer before I had a podcast, I've been criticizing the front office for years because I think they have not held up their end of the bargain for years. So, like, I will continue to be critical of the front office, and I am not going to excuse the lack of activity and the lack of improving the roster. So I am firmly on your side. I think they have made their bed, and I think they now have to go out and deliver. That they have to now. Are they going to deliver a roster as good as OKC or San Antonio? Probably not. I would be pretty surprised if they do. I don't even know if it's possible to. I made this point on Lakers Collective today. If you land Walker Kessler and Herb Jones, I don't know that that's better than the peak version of San Antonio or OKC. Like, it just might not be in the cards for the Lakers this summer, but you need to have progress. You need to walk away from the summer with a long-term piece and someone that you can feel comfortable with being like, we got Luka, we got Austin, and we got Player X. And like, that's a big part of our foundation. If they don't do that at a minimum, I think it's an incredibly disappointing offseason. Like, again, if it's the retreads, if it's the vets, and it's just, hey, we added a couple veterans, we tried to mix up the core, upgrade over DA or Marcus with, like, again, Williams and Oubre or something along those lines. It's like, there's just not enough. That they need younger, more athletic, long-term pieces. That would be my thing. So I'm with you. There are no excuses. This Notorious CRG follows up. Think of a super chat. Fine line between building for Luka and bootlicking. Yeah, it's certainly a fine line there. I would just say that it's not uncommon for superstars to have rosters built around them. Like that's just more so my larger point. Like I feel like sometimes people act like, I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm just saying in general, like sometimes people will act like, it's the first time that a front office has bent the knee to a superstar and given them what they wanted. Like that's kind of how this has gone for years. And like the Lakers have also prided themselves on being one of those franchises that is superstar friendly, that is collaborative with their stars and what they want. So, already you add Cameron Carr, who's a Bill Duffy guy, Luka guy. Like, I think he was the best player available as well, but certainly there's a political element there to kind of grease the wheels a little bit with that. But yeah, I agree. I think that's where as a GM, you have to have the backbone to push back against some, because I think a perfect example of this is the Russell Westbrook trade. And I don't want to relitigate that because that's its own 4-hour podcast, but there was a push from LeBron and Clutch to get that third star. And then they ultimately landed on Russell Westbrook as maybe the most attainable option at that point, or the option that made the most sense. And if you're the Lakers at that point, you have to talk them down from that. You have to talk them down from it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And like, you have to have the wherewithal and the relationship to be like, yo, like, we're trying to get you the third star. We know you want some ball handling off your plate. We know you want some athletic score in the backcourt. Okay, we're working our best to do that. But Russell Westbrook's not the guy. It doesn't fit. You need a shooter. You need spacing. You need a guy to play off you and AD. That's not Russ. He needs the ball in his hands. He's not a good shooter. It's not going to work. Like you need to have that conversation. So that's where I would say the fine line is of like, I don't think inherently any of Luka's asks are wrong. Asking for an A-list center, I think most teams need an A-list center. Asking for shooting, most teams need shooting. Like those aren't crazy asks. Now, when we get into like the whole Austin part and LeBron part, that's where we can disagree or contextualize things differently. But I think that the difference for me between building for him and bootlicking, like there's a difference there. But so far, in my opinion, I have not heard anything that's like egregious in terms of the asks. But obviously, we'll see. Like we can only have the full picture once we have the full picture. And once we do, we can have that conversation. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. Topic change from these nauseating idiots. Jovan, was going independent last year a success for you? And are you happy with your prospects this season? Yes, I would say going independent was a success for me. I think inherently I'm more of a lone wolf type. I'm like, my ideal workday is I just go to a coffee shop and just have a few cold brews and I'm just on my computer and on my phone and just watching film and looking up numbers and talking to people and doing different things. And like, this is just what I live and breathe every day. And I think for me, I've talked about why I left and some of the things with that, but I ultimately was falling out of love with writing and had fallen in love with this. And like, I had been interested in podcasting for a long time. Like I had started a podcast outside of The Athletic in 2018. Then I brought that podcast over to The Athletic in 2019. I started another podcast in 2021. Once I switched over to the Lakers, I also had the Lakers podcast that was through The Athletic. So like I had 5 years there where I was pretty consistently podcasting, not on YouTube, not on like the highest level that I wanted to be, but like I think around this time I became like a full-time beat reporter. I also started a podcast. So I had these like parallel paths that I was on of the beat writer life and writing all the time versus podcasting. And like, there's something about the challenge of it because it did not come naturally to me. Like, and even now, I mean, if you go back, I'm not even going to say it, but like, just I definitely grown, I would say, as a podcaster, as a personality, as a content creator. And I had some rough, I just was more awkward on camera, wasn't as comfortable being myself. So it definitely was a challenge that it just different part of the brain was activated being a podcaster, content creator on camera versus being a writer. And I also looked at the state of the industry and like, I think jobs at The Athletic are pretty safe and jobs at certain companies are pretty safe. But for the most part, it's a shrinking industry. And the quickest thing that's going away is writing. And the TV jobs are still there. The radio jobs are still relatively there. The podcasting jobs, that's the area that's expanding. But for myself, I wanted to future-proof my career. I also just enjoyed podcasting more than writing. And from that lens, like I've not missed writing 1 ounce. I have missed The Athletic. I've missed working with my editors and my colleagues, but like I ultimately, from a workflow perspective, prefer being my own boss and making my own hours and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I would say, financially, it has been a success and it's been continuing to grow with the audience and the numbers and whatnot. So happy about my prospects this season. There were a couple places I talked to last summer that I'll probably talk to again. And I am open to potentially working at a place depending on the context of the situation. I'm not giving up my podcast and I'm not writing again. So, or would not want writing to be my full thing again. So like, I think I'd be coming at it through a different lens. And like one of the early lessons I learned in my career that I think is important for anyone who wants to get into media is like, I was working at ESPN and I was an editor, and there was one editor who worked their way up from being an editor to being a writer and reporter. It took them 8 years of being an editor to do that. And there was an opening in a market that was not a glamorous market. This person earned that opportunity and they were there and they did it for a couple of years. And then they eventually transitioned back to being an editor. And during the process of me deciding what I wanted to do with my career, I talked to several higher up execs at ESPN, and they all universally said, you should leave. If you stay an editor here, you will always be viewed as an editor here. You need to leave, go become a writer, go become a reporter somewhere else. And then we will hire you back or someone else will hire you. And like, that's like, you need to go do the thing and then you'll get hired to do the thing. It's hard to work your way up in that, through that lens. So I think for me, I also had an element of that. Like, that's what I did. I went out and became a beat reporter for The Athletic and did that for 7 years. But I also had that element with like the podcasting where I was like, if I want this to be my full-time thing, I either can do it solo, like independent and be on that path. Or if I want to work for a company at some point in the future, I need to have the proof of concept that I can do this. And so that's kind of been what I've been trying to do as well with this, is like show that I can do this. I can build an audience. I can, have a certain amount of viewership. And if that lends itself to me working somewhere else in the future, so be it. If it's just independent forever, it's been fun. So I appreciate the thoughtful question. Oshafi, thank you for the super chat. There's a difference between a max to maintain mediocrity and a max to help you win. I feel like the other teams would want him to maintain mediocrity. The one pushback here I would say is Detroit's a pretty good team. And I mean, not even they were 1 seed. They made the second round. So I wouldn't say Detroit is a mediocre team. Like maybe a little bit lower on them, where I have them maybe at best as the third best team in the East, third or fourth, depending on where you put Cleveland. I think New York and Boston are clearly the two best teams in the East. But Brooklyn, obviously, trying to be relevant. I think they're trying to go from being bad to at least like bad and relevant, or mediocre and relevant. So I think Brooklyn, 100% agree with you. Detroit, I would push back a little bit in terms of like the mediocre framing. But again, I don't think the max is going to really matter this year, but certainly depending on how Austin performs, depending on if he can stay healthy, depending on if he can continue to get better, depending on how he performs in the playoffs, that will determine how we view this contract. Like there's no, we could project out what we think it's going to be. And look, I said like my preference would have been something in the high 30s or around 40. I would go maybe a little bit above that, but like my preference would have been something in that 40-ish range. 46 is above that. So I'm not going to disagree or overlook the potential downside here. Like there is a downside that maybe if Austin just tops out at the current player, like you look at that 48 million and that 51 million, and you're just like, that's not, he's not up to that level maybe. And that's totally, I think a realistic outcome here. So I'm not diminishing that or dismissing that, but I would say, at least in the Detroit perspective, like that it was a legit team that has real ambitions, that viewed Austin as a potential missing piece. Alma, thank you for the super chat. Hi, Jovan. Do you think AR will have the same motivation to improve now that he's secured his bag? Given this level of money, ideally Austin is a great third option. The $50 million player option is a tough pill to swallow. I think it's a fair question, fair way to frame this. I think Austin is intrinsically motivated, and I think Austin is someone who can thrive on a chip on his shoulder, being doubted. And like technically, yes, he's a max player now. The Lakers, there's an element of like the Lakers, did validate him in the ultimate way in terms of like for players, like there's obviously championships, there's MVPs, the highest awards, but like money is a big component of your stature in the league, how you're perceived, and getting a max contract is a special thing that does put Austin in a certain class. I believe I saw one place said he's the 41st highest paid player next year. I think another place I saw 30th. So I'd have to double check that in terms of but like he's being paid at a minimum as like a top 40 player, which I think is fair based on last year. But I would also say he's not going to stay the 41st ranked player. It's going to continue to go up. Obviously, once you hit 48, 51, that's a rare air. And like for him to be in that top 30 or top 25 mix, he does need to improve and play at that like beginning of the season level for the entire season, which partly is health related, and he's got to stay healthy. That said, to your point, in terms of the money, 51, or I think it's almost $52 million player option is a tough pill to swallow if he does not continue to improve. And that you also have to factor in, he is 28. So he'll be, I believe, 3 years from now, he'll be 31. So I'll be going into his age, 31 to 32 season. So we'll see where he's at physically and just where he's at that stage of his career. The one thing I'll push back or not push back, but like highlight is like, if you look at New York has 3 guys that are going to be making 45 plus million. And so for at least the next couple of years, Austin fits more in that like mid 40s range. 41 this year, 45, 48. So it is doable. It's difficult, but it's doable. And it's on the Lakers to figure out how to make that work, how to go get their OG Anunoby, how to go get their Josh Hart, how to go get their Mikal Bridges. But I think it is technically possible. Like New York is the model to me that's closest to what the Lakers are trying to do. And now they have to go do it. Lolo or Loavec or Lolo Avec. I hope I covered one of the correct pronunciations there. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jovan, love your show. In my opinion, I want LeBron gone. If you were Pelinka, how would you fill out the roster if the Lakers decide to fully move from LeBron? Good question. So I would say if LeBron is gone and you have Austin, I'm going to pull up the cap sheet here for a second because it gets a little... I'm just seeing without LeBron what this looks like. So no LeBron. I'll pull this up just to show you guys. Let's have some fun here. Okay, so this is my cap sheet for LA, no LeBron, and this is with Jackson on the cap hold, estimated contract for number 25 pick. So you have Luka, Austin on his cap hold, Vando, DA opting in, Jake LaRavia, Jackson Hayes, DK. Now that would be Cameron Carr as the 25th pick or 24th pick. That number will actually go up a little bit in terms of his contract by maybe a couple 100,000 or something. Bronny, Adu, 2 empty roster charges. So that's $116 million in salary with $48.9 million in cap space. You could rescind the rights to Jackson Hayes, and that would then become an empty roster charge. So you'd get about $3.1 million. So that'd be nicely that $52 million number. And then if DA opts out at that 8.1, you replace that with a 1.36 empty roster charge. That would go to about 6.7. So you'd have about 58.7. So I roughly said 60 earlier. 58.7 is a more accurate number. So if you lose DA and Jackson, or at least the cap hold for Jackson, you're at $58.7 million. And this is, remember, Austin is agreed, but Austin is not signed. Austin's going to sign after you use the cap space. In that case, with $58.7 million in cap space, and factoring in, you also have the room exception for 9.4. I do everything I can to convince Marcus Smart, please sign the room exception. Like that would be my preference. So you get, let's just hypothetically say you get Marcus locked up, 9.4, put that to the side. You could add Marcus in later. Then you have $58.7 million to add either a center or a wing and potentially keep Rui, potentially keep Luke. Those would be the two free, and Jackson. Those would be the 3 free agents hanging in the balance here. So what I would say is I would go hard after Walker Kessler, Jalen Duren, and Peyton Watson and see which one of those 3 guys you can pry. I would probably prioritize Kessler and Duren. But if it comes down to, could you get like if the potential cost is 35 for Kessler plus like 1 to 2 picks to Utah, or you maybe even just throw Kessler 37, 38 and keep your picks, that could be an attractive alternative, but you have to make that calculation there. Duren, I think, is going to cost close, like high 30s into closer to 40, most likely. And then Watson, I think, is going to be in the high 20s, maybe even upwards of closer to 30 million. So that's where you have to just play the board with the intel that you have and figure out who's the most attainable guy. Go get that guy. So I'd go add one of those 3 players. Again, if it's Duren or Kessler, you have somewhere probably between 18 to 23 million left over. If it's Watson, you might have almost 30 million left over. So there is a bit of a gap there, 28 to 30 or so, or maybe even a little bit more. So in that case, I would probably go, if you get Watson, I would then be a little bit more okay with the center by committee plan, because you got your wing, and on some level that's like a LeBron replacement, because I think Watson's more of a 4 than a 3. So maybe you have enough money to retain Rui and go get Robert Williams or Mitchell Robinson, someone like that. Or maybe you replace Rui with like a Kelly Oubre Jr., who you're like, we'll take a step back in terms of the shooting, but he actually averaged more points than Rui and has like been a stronger per possession scorer. And he's a better rebounder. He's a better defender, more of a motor utility guy than Rui is. So maybe like some sort of 2 or 3 year deal for Kelly Oubre. So I would then piece together, like, you need still a center. I mean, if you could trade for Gafford, like, it'd be great if you could do Watson and then you trade for Gafford. And then if you did, let's say you did Watson for like 28 million and then you trade for Gafford, who's making 17, that gets you to 45. You still have $13 million left over. You could throw a bag at 12 or 13 million at Williams or Oubre. You probably lose Rui in that case, but then maybe you go into next season, let's just say hypothetically, with a form of, you could have Gafford, Watson, Oubre, or Smart, Luka and Austin, or you could have Gafford, Watson, Rui, potentially Luka and Austin, or Gafford, Watson, Smart, Luka, Austin, Robert Williams off the bench, and it's not the deep, like the cap space route. That's the issue with the cap space route is I think it does condense, like you're adding a high level starter or maybe even a couple, but you're not really bolstering the bench. That's where things get a little bit tricky. That would be one path. If you go the center route, you lose Rui probably, and then you're now in that like Kelly Oubre range. But that would probably be my preference. If you go above the cap, this is where things get tricky because to get to that 48.9, you could add in Austin, and then you could re-sign Rui, let's say 18 to 20 million, re-sign Marcus maybe 10 to 12, and you would have to use an exception on Marcus. That's a tough part, but you could re-sign Luke, and then you could take on Walker Kessler, Watson, one of these guys in a trade, or do a trade for Herb and Misi, something like that, with the picks, and just take them into under your first apron space, and that be an option that works. So I mean, that's when we talk about the replacing LeBron. Like these options aren't great. I mean, you might like some of these. Like Gafford and Watson is interesting. Kessler and Oubre, or Duran and Oubre, is that really moving the needle that much for you? I don't know. And you probably wouldn't be able to keep Rui in that case. So yeah, it's tricky. I'm not like, this is why I'm not the GM and president of the team, and I'm not getting paid millions of dollars to make these decisions. But certainly if you do move on from LeBron, you have options, but at that, so here's a couple of cap sheets that I had done where this is a version. I had Austin making 35. So this is, you could just make him, if you do 41 here, the Lakers are still under the luxury tax, but you could do no LeBron, Kessler, but Kessler is going to make more. So this is where we get, then you'd have to cut off some of the cap space here from some of the other teams. But let's just hypothetically that something like this, you could do Luka, Austin, Kessler, Rui, Vando, Smart, Thibault. But this is assuming you get Kessler either via sign and trade or just straight up with an offer sheet. But again, you're basically running it back and just adding Matisse Thibault aside from Kessler. You're not really adding much. Here's a Watson version where, again, we have to update the Austin number here. But Watson at 28, you're at even lower salary. You add Williams, you keep DA. How do you feel about that? Like, it basically is, these two Pats are essentially like Kessler or Watson plus a non-taxpayer MLE level guy. Now, depending on how you can get off, if DA opts out, that gives you some more options. Depending on how you can leverage the picks, that gives you more options. But here's another one where gotta update Austin, but you trade Vando and DK plus a pick and something else for Misi and Herb, maybe a pick and a swap in a second, something like that. You get Herb and Misi. You also sign Mitchell Robinson and Rui and Kelly Oubre and Matisse Thybulle with your cap space. You use the room exception on Marcus. You do lose Luke, but now you're going to next season with Luka and Austin in the backcourt, Mitchell Robinson, Herb, and then you have to choose, maybe Rui's the 4, Kelly Oubre's coming off the bench. Then your bench is Oubre, Smart, Thibault, Jackson Hayes, and Misi. And that's an interesting group. And so you end up using the picks to get a couple of the New Orleans guys. You get off DK and Vando, and then you also are splitting your cap space among Robinson, Rui, Oubre, and Thibault. So, I mean, I guess that's like, but you're not getting you're not getting the Kessler, you're not getting the Watson, you're not getting the Duran. So these are some of the ways that you can finagle the non-LeBron cap builds. Sham's tweet. Let's see. So I appreciate JM Ball saying that the Shams tweet. So Lakers acquired number 56 from the Bulls, and they sent cash. 56 is interesting because typically, that's famously the Bronny range, and that is the range of the draft where people, it typically does not net out to a roster player, but who knows? Maybe the Lakers find some value. I'm surprised that is 56 pick. You usually don't like. We'll see. Maybe they make something of that. At least it's a gamble. Like I'm all for taking the gamble. Lakers Spotlight. Thank you for the super chat. Two more here. Then I do have to go. Right before the draft. AR will be the asset that leads us to a championship like Randall was for New York in the cat trade. If he's not on the team that wins, his contract will get us there. I think that's a positive way to frame this in terms of either Austin leveling up to live up to the second half of the contract or Austin being a piece that the Lakers ultimately flip and that being something that helps catapult LA to the next iteration. So you would hope he's not the Randall and that it ends up being a bad contract, but certainly there's a chance there. And then final one from the Enigma 2004. Congrats, Jovan. You called Reaves rise from the very beginning in 2022. Take a bow. Also consider bringing Andy Kamenetsky to Lakers Collective. So another name in the hat. Appreciate the compliment. Appreciate acknowledging my optimism on Austin from the beginning. And honestly, I did not see this. I did not see a max player. I did not see the last season that he had and being considered like at the time an all-star lock and even an all-NBA candidate. But it's been an incredible rise and very excited to see where it goes from here because now he's being paid and recognized as a max player. The underdog story will always be a part of Austin's story, but he's no longer an underdog. He is being paid like top two guy on a championship team. He has been recognized and validated and stamped as that. So now he's got to live up to that, and he's got to level up. He's got to be healthier. He's got to shoot better, take care of the ball more, play better defense, and go to a level that we have not yet seen from him. And if he does that, which the Lakers are taking a massive bet on, then I think he will just continue to prove people wrong who have been doubting him since even going back to high school. So appreciate that super chat. But I am going to wrap here, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk center targets and some of my favorite centers, wing targets on Friday. I have free agent bargains over the weekend, and then eventually West tiers leading into Monday's episode, which will be my ideal offseason, my big board, what I want LA to do. Then offseason starts or free agency starts on Tuesday. So of course, things will break along the way, and I'm sure we'll have to pivot and talk about that. But appreciate you guys for rocking with me. Appreciate the late night gang.